things don't work out well for him, but they work out even less well for the Balrog. But either way, he kind of is still leading them in showing that this is what needs to be done. You have to fall into the deepest abyss and confront your greatest fear.
That is a great point.
If he ran away from that in that moment and was like, hey, I tripped him and he fell down, we're good. Like, let's keep going. We got past him, guys. I tricked him. Like Home Alone style, like The Hobbit 2 style. Freaking, no, anyways. Like, yeah, we tricked Smaug. Okay, great. But instead it was like, no, here's how I'm going to lead you. I'm going to drop down into the darkness.
Yeah, how can I expect Frodo to go
confront
into
what
his
lies ahead
and his Balrog
exactly
if
in
I'm
Mordor.
not willing to do it?
Right.
Welcome back to all of our supporters, patrons, subscribe stars, YouTube members. Thank you for all of your support in making this podcast possible. I do want to say we've got a lot of new equipment.
Yeah.
It's so good.
Hopefully you notice.
Everything looks a lot better. Skin tones, we have to do no more color correction in post after this.
That's right. These
cameras are amazing. New lighting, new audio equipment, mixers. I'm very, very excited about where things are going. This is made possible by you, and so I want to thank you for that. We are going to, this space is not the final space. That's kind of the last piece of the equation, is we have a space that we're going to be building out, which will give us it'll look awesome, just trust me. But I just want to say it's thanks to your support of the channel, your financial support of the channel that's making this possible and making the show better. So thank you. We're going to continue on with where we left off in Lord of the Rings, which was at the end of the Council of Elrond. We're halfway through the movie on episode 6 or whatever.
We're doing it, though. We're making it. We're getting closer.
I think we'll be able to start getting further. There's not so much now.
I'm
Maybe
bumping
I'm
up
wrong.
to, my notes go up to Lothlorien, but we'll see. My notes were up to Lothlorien. We definitely won't go past that, but we'll see.
Yeah.
So the first note I have here is that as they leave, you see those really epic shots of the helicopter going around, and you see them approaching. They're walking over the hill, and then this was the very first trailer for this movie. Was the shot of them all kind of passing. There's a big rock, and Gandalf is in front, and they all kind of walk past, and you see them all.
The nine in single file.
Yeah, beautiful, and it's just dun 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 dun. And that was the first trailer.
Yes.
It was just that shot, and it was like Lord of the Rings.
I hadn't touched on this yet. There was a great video that was done by Nerdwriter a few years ago that talked about the score of Fellowship of the Ring. And he talks about how different musical leitmotifs were sort of slowly brought in until this moment where the entire
crescendo.
The entire Fellowship theme in its fullest glory it comes right here in this part you're talking about.
Where they're all
but you'll
together.
get this instrument's part of it in this piece. And it sort of like slowly develops until it comes into its full
with the brass
here, and then you get it sort of dying throughout the rest of the film to where the last time you hear that theme is when the Fellowship is broken, and it's kind of a sad, slow piece of it. So the score really is really built around the Fellowship sort of being gathered and then it breaking. That is the musical language of the film, and it's really excellent. So I totally suggest, if you haven't seen that video from Nerdwriter, go watch it, because he breaks it down in a way that's phenomenal.
Nice.
And I would only basically be parroting exactly what he said in his video. So go check it out. But yeah, you get the Fellowship theme in full for the first time here as they're walking.
And this is it. This is they're fulfilling their purpose. They're doing, it's all of them. Everything's together. Things are working. They're moving towards Mordor. Everything's going well. And basically, this is the only time that is the case. At every other point, whether it's trying to cross the mountain, they're to go through Moria and lose Gandalf, it's like things are not going the way that they're supposed to. Right? Basically, at any point after this. I want to bring this up because this is something that as a kid, I was upset that was left out. And it's the warg fight.
Yes, from the book.
Yes.
They kind of put this into Two Towers instead, but
something like it with the Rohirrim. You're right.
They kind of did it there instead.
It was cool back then because in the book, I think Legolas shoots an arrow and Gandalf lights the arrow on fire in the air, and it hits a wolf.
It's so sick.
But then they can't find the wolf the next morning. Anyways, Really cool. So Two Towers did not give me that.
No.
However,
yeah, and no, this isn't where he lights the pine cones. That's Hobbit.
That's the Hobbit.
He lights the pine cones on fire because it's a similar thing, wargs attack or whatever.
It's almost the same thing, actually.
But yeah, but it's really, really cool.
It's so cool. But I'm actually not. I'm okay that they left it out of the movie now because it's so. I love it, and this is how movies used to be. Now there are plenty of action scenes in these movies, but movies nowadays, 2023, 4, whatever year it is now, they can't leave out, like they have to pack in the action. They have to pack in more and more and more action scenes. It's refreshing to see an action scene, something that perfectly would have been very workable and very cool as an action scene, be cut from the movie because it just doesn't work towards the greater, like they're moving. We've got a Balrog, like just wait. The action's coming, just wait. Instead of feeling like they have to constantly, and Legolas is constantly doing all his tricks like 5,000 times every
it gets more and more ridiculous.
It does
as the whole trilogy goes on.
Yes, and Peter Jackson, it's like a joke. It's a running joke. Okay, great, but I'm not here to watch a running joke, Peter Jackson.
Yeah,
okay,
right.
No,
I take this very, very seriously.
Me too. This is very important stuff here.
Very freaking serious stuff.
But they left it out of the movie, and I just think that's wonderful. Very refreshing, very, very nice.
Yeah.
And then, of course, they introduced the three options for moving westward, right? They've got the Gap of Rohan. This is go here, or we can go over the mountain, or we can go under the mountain, right?
Yeah.
And the book also mentioned that they could sail around through Up Umbar. I think we talked about this.
Yes, they don't talk about this in the movie.
They don't. Yeah. So there was a fourth option, but it was going to take too long, I think was the problem with it.
And I think they were expecting that because they would have come into, I don't remember which port it was, but they were expecting Haradrim would have probably...
The Haradrim. That's right.
Possibly intercepted.
That's right.
Yeah.
Now, what I love about this, again, the only reason I really bring it up is because this is how Aragorn gets to Minas Tirith.
Right.
On
Eventually.
his own. Yes, in his own way. But it's just not the way. So the Fellowship, they kind of all go these different ways. Now, of course, with Moria and whatnot, but then Aragorn goes to Rohan, which, oh no, we can't go to Rohan. That's too close to Isengard. Okay, well, they got Merry and Pippin, so we're going to Rohan, right? Yeah. And then they tried the mountain, they went under it, and Aragorn takes the Corsairs to Umbar. So it's like all four of these paths kind of converge, in Return to the King. Something really, really cool. I've got Caradhras, and I find it so interesting that Gandalf, of all the options available, Gandalf was like, this is the one that we have to try first.
And
this is what happened.
This is a huge change from the book.
Yeah.
In the book, Gandalf had kind of been pushing the whole time that we're going to have to go through Moria.
Right.
And Aragorn was like, please, if there's any other way. There's
a bit of a reversal.
I say we go. And Gandalf was like conceding to him. And this is kind of a thing I feel like I miss a little bit from the book.
Yeah.
They gave Gandalf and Aragorn a very close to equal sort of role in leadership of this fellowship.
Yeah.
And that
cool
Gandalf respected him enough to kind of concede to him in this choice.
Yes.
Because Gandalf's entire purpose here is to elevate Aragorn anyways.
Right.
He's not here to lead. He's not here to do this. It's not his quest.
Right.
His entire purpose as an Istari is to advise the people there to do what's necessary to win.
But that they do it themselves. Yeah.
And so that's why he's not as powerful as, say, even though he's a Maiar, just like the Balrogs or just like Sauron himself.
Yeah.
He doesn't have... His body was never intended to have that kind of might and power in the first place. Right. So he couldn't fight Sauron himself and win. And he barely freaking fights off this Balrog and survives. In fact, he doesn't survive.
No, he does not, actually.
It kills him too. But the point is, he's not supposed to use his power to influence. He's supposed to use his wisdom to influence. And so he was sort of conceding to Aragorn. And Aragorn, they're both kind of right in the book. Aragorn's right. Going through Moria is a really bad idea. And we shouldn't do that. We should try anything else first.
Yeah.
And so I think we should go over Caradhras because obviously the Gap of Rohan, their spies are there. And if we take the ships, who knows what we'll find, and it'll take way too long.
Yeah.
And we may be too late. So we should go this way.
It's
and Gandalf is like, okay, but like I'm telling you, and he's right.
Right.
It's going to end up being Moria.
The red horn has a life of its own, basically.
Yeah,
and it's like you can't just cross Caradhras. You can't. It's like they almost went a little too far south for that.
Yeah.
If they should have taken the Rivendell path that Gandalf took in The Hobbit, and then come down.
Yes.
It's like
but there's
we're a little too far along
that way now.
Exactly, that was part of it because from the north the goblins were starting to come down.
Right.
So as they're climbing Caradhras, Boromir, so Frodo kind of falls and loses the ring, and Boromir picks up the ring. And
I love this scene.
This line is so good because as Boromir is looking at the ring, and he says this line, he says, "Why do we suffer so much fear and doubt over so small a thing?"
Mm-hmm.
That is, how would I put this? Those are the words of Sauron, basically.
Yep.
That small things are insignificant.
Mm-hmm.
That's why Sauron never cared much. He didn't think that Frodo was going to be a big problem for him. He didn't think that a tiny little thing was going to basically undo him. That was just, that never entered into his mind that that was even possible. It's like, okay, of course Aragorn's probably going to get the ring and then from Baggins and then he's going to use it and whatever. That's what he was looking at. And that's also what Boromir is looking at.
Yeah,
Boromir says small things can't do much. And, you know, he's tasked with protecting Frodo, who is a small thing. Hobbits are just these little people.
Yeah.
Yet he can't see the value, right? He doesn't really understand it, and he never does. And that's why all the way up until the very end, he's just like, there's really only one solution here, and it's one of the big people taking this thing.
Yes.
The little things aren't important. And I love Tolkien's just message on that front in general.
Yeah.
Right? That like, what is it? Even the smallest person can change the world. That's, I think Galadriel says that later on.
Yes, right.
Like, just because you're small, just because you're only one person, doesn't mean that you're insignificant, you know, and that, as Gandalf says, there are other forces at work than just the will of evil, that there is, you know, there are other forces at work that value the contributions of even the smallest person and aren't too concerned with the high and mighty and how important they think they are.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's really good stuff. It's beautiful.
Yeah. Man, I think that this line in the book comes actually at the end when Boromir tries to take the ring from Frodo.
Yeah.
So the line is still there in the novel, but I really like it coming here. Again, we kind of talked about the way Boromir was changed for the film.
Yeah.
He came across as a little more noble, not quite so sketchy as in the movie.
Yeah.
I do think, and we were just talking about this a little bit with Spirits Within, they dumb down things a little bit, but they don't go too far in these movies.
I don't think so.
But they do need to make it something that everyone can follow.
Yeah.
Right. So they're foreshadowing the fact that Boromir is going to betray them from the moment he appears on screen.
From the moment he appears. And from the moment that the blade reveals his blood to be unroyal and the royal sword turns on him. That's the moment that we're like, hey, this guy doesn't have what it takes. He's not it. And he drops the handle.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, we're not getting good vibes from him.
So you kind of get there's two different paths to Boromir's redemption. In the novel version, he's this extremely noble, strong, awesome character that you really like.
Yeah.
And then he has one moment where he falls and you go, oh no, Boromir, you feel bad because you liked that character.
Right.
And then he redeems himself and it's real sad. In the movie version, it's more like, I don't know what I feel about this guy. I feel like he's going to do something. I'm suspicious of this character. But then he comes around in the end and redeems himself, and you end up thinking highly of him when it's over.
Right.
I think both ways work. They're executed great. Yeah. It's just kind of two different flavors of getting to the same ends. Mm-hmm. And so I like that they've taken that line and put it here because, again, it's building up to that. He's just more and more becoming seduced by this thing, and it's more and more obvious. But it gives a different flavor to his redemption that is also very satisfying.
You're right. That's true.
So I really like it.
Yeah.
Coming here and that sort of slow build up to his betrayal of Frodo.
And another really interesting thing about this scene is that Aragorn has his hand on his sword. Aragorn was ready to kill Boromir right then and there. Right. And that's just crazy. I don't really need to say anything more about that. That's just wild.
Well, yeah, because in the novel they had talked so much, and Aragorn was very, very keen to go straight to the freaking city, Minas Tirith.
Oh yeah,
he wanted to go there. His heart was like, I need to go to Minas Tirith. I want to go with Boromir. They felt more like brothers.
Right. Yeah.
Boromir really respected Aragorn more in the book. Yeah. And and so you lose a little bit of that, but again, I feel like it all works to the ends that they're going with Boromir's character in the end.
And he is quite valiant in the very end of the movie.
Yes.
You know, and the way they took the little ones, you know, I couldn't help it. It's like almost as if when he finally realizes that Frodo, this little person, you know, is more significant than he thought, and he loses his mind and he's crying. He's like, Frodo, I'm sorry. But Frodo's like, not having it. I'm out. Like, we're done. The fellowship's over. then he finds his new calling, like in the last minutes of his life, defending Merry and Pippin, basically. And he's just like, all right, little things are important. Like I was sidetracked. I'm back on track now, and I'm going to defend these like little people.
Right.
So very good.
Another interesting, I guess, dynamic to the character in the novel versus the movie was that he was basically they really or I should say Tolkien really plays up how loyal he is there, because he spoke against almost every freaking decision they make. Yeah. We should not be trying to go over this mountain. We should not go into Moria. We should go to the Gap of Rohan.
You're right.
And they're like, no, we can't do that.
But
okay, I will defer to you because I promised I would. And then later on, it's almost at every turn, he's like, nope, we should not do this.
Don't go to Lorien.
We should not go into that forest. A bad idea. We should not do this. A bad idea. We should go to Minas Tirith. Guys, you don't ever listen to me. It always goes wrong. You never freaking listen to me. Please go to Minas Tirith. And they're like, no, my heart just telling me not to do that. What do you mean? Your freaking heart's telling you not to do it. Guys, it's so stupid. And you can really feel for him.
Right.
Because he's like, even though I am strongly against all these decisions being made, I still chose to follow you.
Right.
Are you going to call me a thief after all of that?
Right. That's
after all this time I followed you, why do you recoil from me?
Right.
Have I not proven my friendship as he's going crazy, So
it's like
anyway,
the two sides of him,
Yeah. I just wanted to mention that, even though this is the film analysis, but
Legolas walking on snow.
Yeah.
Just a fun little touch.
A little, like you said, a touch. Again,
they didn't call attention to it much.
You can't put every cool thing from that novel into this movie, but that's a nice way to sort of pay homage to it, or just like throw a little detail in there that, again, sort of like, they're really following the book. Even though they're not, it feels like they are.
It feels like they are.
Yeah,
Once again, with the fell voice on the air. In the movies, they're like, this is Saruman, right? They're hearing echoes.
Was not the
it
case.
Was the mountain itself that was laughing at them and that seemed to be whispering. And, I
liked that better.
In this, I do like it better in the book. But once again, just like with replacing Glorfindel with Arwen, replacing the mountain with Saruman, it works to further the character of an actual person we're going to see later, not a one-off mountain that just laughs at us and then we leave.
That's a very good point.
And he's gone.
I think that makes a lot of sense.
So I do love that the mountain is a character in the book, but Saruman is probably more important in this one. So I really liked it. And it shows his power. Saruman is very powerful.
Very powerful.
He can do things. He can work, he can work the heavens, I guess, to his own ends.
Yeah.
So anyways, now that didn't work, right? And Boromir shows his courage as well. It was always Boromir and Aragorn that were like plowing through the snow or like carrying the hobbits like through where the hobbits couldn't do it, and they'd carry him for them. And
that was another place where Boromir was like instrumental, was in clearing
he's just
the
big
snow.
Body.
He's like stronger than everybody in the whole fellowship, and he just plows through the snow with his bare arms and just like makes a path for them to get back down.
And then it's just wild. So anyways, this doesn't work. They end up having to go through the Mines of Moria. And
dude, I love this whole sequence.
The intro,
the Mines of Moria sequence even from the beginning when they first arrive in front of the door, all the way to the end when Gandalf falls, it's
really
possibly my favorite sequence. We're not talking about scenes,
like many minutes.
So like in terms of movie structure, you have a sequence, and there are many scenes that go into a sequence, but there are many sequences in a movie.
Yeah.
So this sequence contains many scenes. This sequence, from the beginning to the ends of Mines of Moria, is my favorite sequence of any film of all time.
It's really,
I just love it.
The way it ends is just...
It's amazing.
It is amazing. But the intro of it is so good, because then you get Saruman once again in his little study in Orthanc, and he's like, Moria, you fear to go into those mines. And he's just reading a little picture book. Just this picture book. It's like, you know what they awoke. And it's so good because it's like he's talking to Gandalf, but Gandalf's not there.
Yeah.
But we've already shown he kind of projects his voice. And even in the books, Saruman's skill is with his voice.
Yes.
Right? Like his voice, he can throw his voice. He can make it sound different. He can convince people very well through his voice. And they're kind of showing that here in the movie by like Saruman's voice can carry. His voice has power itself. It's almost like he's in Gandalf's ear. In that very moment as he's just flipping through the picture.
I like that.
Yeah, it's so good.
That's a good, because of course they're trying to quickly exposit like necessary information.
Yeah.
And these two characters are not actually talking to each other.
But they feel
but they kind of are.
Like they are. And you get this a little bit later in Lorien, where you see Galadriel with her eyes, and she's talking to Frodo from like like many miles away as soon as they first get into Lorien, and Lorien's like, you bring great evil here, and like, but Frodo can't see anyone, and it's just the voice that he's hearing. So they do it multiple times, and these people are really communicating in a way with each other. There's a way in which they're actually communicating. So I'd love too that they even made that book that Saruman's reading. Somebody probably spent a long time making this whole
like
sick
drawing
killer
out all
book.
of those illustrations
and like
stuff.
using the old time methods of like book binding and making it look like a medieval tome, and just and same thing with the book in the Balin's tomb. That like, oh man,
so cool
to have created a book like that, or to even be capable of doing that. That like the prop masters were so good in this movie. They were so good. But all the props, all the things that they did for this movie is just something else. And of course, there's going to be people who are like, I spent all year on one prop. It didn't even make it in.
You don't even see it.
You don't even
it's
see
out
it.
of frame.
Exactly. But that's almost necessary. You have to make too much in pre-production because you don't want to be stuck having not made enough.
Yeah.
Right.
You don't have what you need for
exactly.
the shot. Yeah, exactly.
So they always end up making the good movies always end up making too
more
much
than what you see.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love this sequence. It's so dynamic because like you start off with them arriving in front of the doors and they're stuck, you know, and you get
and it's that math painting too.
Trying to figure out, okay, what's the password? You get this real sinister feeling with the water. Don't disturb the water.
Okay. I have a whole thing about that, but you continue.
Yeah, but like it's just dynamic because you get so many. We've talked about this in the past on the podcast before we kind of moved to this storytelling analysis format.
Yeah.
We were still doing storytelling analysis, but not of like a full work. We were kind of just picking elements
Little
of storytelling.
Yeah.
And one of them we talked about was conflict. And
yeah.
the necessity to keep a story interesting of sort of peaks and valleys that start here and they go up and down and up and down and up, but it's sort of like over time it's going up towards a climax, right? So you have like tension and then you release that tension. You have tension, you release that tension. So,
but it's building up.
Yes, it's building upwards.
It's not flat.
And this sequence is like in itself like a masterwork of that kind of tension release and tension release.
Right,
kind
and
of
it
wave
keeps
pattern.
building up. You're right.
Yeah, it's really great. So they get there, and they don't know the password, but like you get this build up of tension around this water that builds up to this great little action sequence with the squid monster thing.
The way they showed like the thing's mouth and like that is a really good looking CG thing.
It's really
and
good.
it's in part because you never really get to see the whole
it's very
thing
obscured
very well.
by water and atmosphere in the
like
area.
Was that just part of it, or it's creepy
it's
stuff.
great.
Yeah, very good.
And there's a real build up to the reveal of that thing because first you just see the tentacles and then it grabs him and then you don't see its face until it's
about
above
to eat
him
Frodo.
and dropping him in its mouth.
That's so good.
And then it of course breaks down. They get inside and so you have a release of tension there.
Yeah.
But actually before that you had seeing the skeletons and
that's right.
In the book,
the tension of the skeletons was released by the monster.
Yes.
and then but then the tension of the goblin armies surrounding them is released by the Balrog.
Yes.
And then so it's like you get a release of tension, but in a way that just
starts
builds
ramping
it
to
up
the
more.
next one.
Yeah.
It's exactly what I'm talking about. It's masterful. This sort of like you just can't quite seem to get off the roller coaster.
Yeah.
But it does give you the release you need to not just feel like too overwhelming and just way too heavy with action. And you get some of the best subtle moments of the film, like when Gandalf is trying to choose which way to go in the tunnels, and he's making jokes about
that doesn't smell so
less foul down this way.
Yeah.
So you get good jokes.
Always follow your nose.
You get good jokes with Pippin, throw yourself in next time, a risk of your stupidity. Like even in moments like that, and then it ramps right back up to a fight.
Right, and then the drums, and it's like, oh, dang it.
And you get, of course, the great line. This was in the beginning of the novel, but it was repurposed here. When he's like, it's a pity Bilbo didn't kill him when he had the chance. Pity. It was pity that stayed Bilbo's hand in the first place. Like, who are you to deal out death and judgment? Don't be too quick to do that.
Yeah.
You get some of the best almost like thematic philosophical content in the film in the midst of this very tense. I mean, because and we have some experience with this. We were in Boy Scouts, and we went on a camp out in which we went exploring caves.
Oh yeah,
And,
I hated that.
yeah, I mean, there was
freaky,
one
man.
portion of it. This actually inspired an entire couple chapters in the novel I've been writing,
Yeah.
because of how intense of an experience it is.
Yeah.
If you've never been
It's
into
scary. It's creepy.
caves, especially there was, I don't know what you call this. I can't remember the terminology, but it's like a crack, like underneath a wall where you crawl underneath, and you're basically being pinned by the mountain. But you're
itself.
sort of crawling through this small space to get into the larger.
They called it a bunny
space.
hole or something. But
I think that's it.
Yeah.
So we had to do this, and there were a lot of us. I felt kind of comfortable. I was kind of okay, but many of not just the scout leaders who were bigger than us and had a much better chance of being freaking stuck in there, but many of us too were like just not so sure about wanting to go in there.
It was Albrechtsen. It was Brother Albrechtsen who talked me in to actually doing it, because I was like, I'm going home, dude. I'm not crawling through that hole.
Going in there.
Yeah.
And that was the attitude. That was the attitude of so many of us. We're like, dude, I'm not going in. That's crazy. Like I'm going to get stuck. I'm never going to get out. I'm going to die in here. Caves have this way of just feeling so oppressive. And it's not even just something like that where you're literally being squeezed between the rock, but just the air itself is heavy.
Yeah, that's right.
And
it's damp. It's always moist in caves.
They accomplish getting across that feeling in this film so well.
You're constantly hearing drips and
so oppressive and dark and heavy in this place. And
except
yet they're able
for the
to,
few moments where they're like, let's risk a little more light.
Yes.
Oh, here's the mithril mine.
Exactly.
Yeah, they kind of release that compression, and you can breathe again. Yeah.
So many times they do that. I can't even count. I mean, I'd have to like go through the film and count the number of tension release points that then kind of rebound right into a higher level of tension and release, and a higher level of tension release, all the way up to the point that is still in my favorite scene even in any film, which is where the bridge of Khazad-dûm when Gandalf faces the Balrog. It gives me chills every time I watch the scene. It's so powerful. Ian McKellen's performance in that scene is
something
absolutely perfect. The power and the anger and the just like majesty of his voice in response, the command that he has in that command that he gives, you shall not pass. Because at first he says you cannot pass. You cannot pass. This is not. I'm not gonna. You can't come this way. And it challenges him.
Right.
And then he commands it. You shall not pass. I will not allow it. And I am stronger than you.
Ooh,
this
that was
big
good.
giant. It's so strong. And I think I remember him, Ian McKellen, that is, talking in behind the scenes about how, well, I mean, this even plays a little bit into his character in X-Men. He was Magneto, right?
Yeah, he was Magneto.
Who was in the concentration camps. But he watched Nazi imagery to build his rage and anger for the performance in that scene.
Right.
I know that it wasn't even just the Jews, but also homosexuals and things like that.
Gypsies and Jehovah's Witnesses.
Right.
It was all kinds of people.
And so he is a homosexual, and so he was using that as a motivation to sort of strike that sort of like anger that he needed to harness for that performance. And it's literally perfect. It literally couldn't be better. It's amazing. And that is the peak of that rising tension through that whole sequence that releases into this terribly sad exit when they're all just in tears, sobbing.
And once again, the music really hammers that home. And just that voice, that vocal track that's playing right as they exit the mines. There's also another abrupt thing that happens right then, which is the lighting change. Now, do you remember watching this in theaters? Man, people who've never seen this movie in theaters won't know what we're talking about, but that was blinding. You didn't realize how long you'd been in Moria. Right? And you really felt like you'd been in there because it was so dark. And as soon as they got out, the whole theater just lit up. It was so bright, you almost couldn't see anymore. It's like, holy cow. This is way too much light, right?
It was
My
so
goodness.
dark, even just the film itself gets so dark in that dark theater.
On purpose.
your eyes are dilating,
Yeah.
and then they hit you with that white light that's just like, whoa.
Which makes it builds the immersion though.
Yeah.
It makes you feel like you were really in those
Yeah,
mines,
for
and now
sure.
you're really out of it. And it's supposed to be a relief, but everyone's crying,
Yeah.
because Gandalf didn't make it. And holy cow! But it really hits you. You can't help but have a physical reaction to it because like. It's so bright, right? That was brilliant use. I've never really seen that in a movie where it was so bright that I literally was like, I need sunglasses.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
but in
exactly.
this movie, they were able to do that.
Yeah.
And very brilliant.
Really good. And I also wanted to say that Gandalf has always been my favorite character of like Tolkien's works.
Yeah.
I think that, there are some first age characters that I've really grown and warmed up to a lot after reading the Silmarillion and Children of Hurin and stuff like that. Like Turambar is another character I really, really love from his mythos. But Gandalf has always been my favorite character. And so I was freaking just crushed, freaking devastated
First
by this.
watching this,
my first viewing, because he was by far my favorite character in the movie.
Yeah.
I loved Gandalf.
Yeah, he's
Gandalf
such
was
a beast.
such a beast. He was so cool. And that movie is that scene is my favorite scene of any movie ever, because he's so powerful. He's so awesome. And you had grown to love this like lovable grandfatherly kind of figure, and then he falls, and it's just like I just was not expecting that. Because he's starting to climb back out, and it's like, oh,
and here's the
he's
thing,
gonna be all
it's
right.
Gandalf.
Yeah,
Like, and I've thought of this many times. I've thought of this so many times because even in the books, he could have climbed out.
yes,
He could have climbed out. He's
Yes.
not so weak and frail that he
Yes.
just had to fall.
he's actually a strong character.
Something else was like driving him to do this first.
Yeah.
That he needed to take care of this first.
Yep.
And then, well,
it's almost
spoiler
it's
alert.
almost a proof.
Come back later.
It's almost like I need to do this
Yeah.
in order to prove I could take on someone like Saruman,
Sure.
who
sure.
was, I think, technically in terms of like power level, more powerful than he was.
Right.
But this was like the test, a proof of himself to show like, no, I can actually
Yeah.
face him and replace him, kind of a thing.
Yes.
And it required a death and rebirth,
Right.
which is
because
symbolically important.
in
but-
his current form,
yeah.
he needed to go through a death and rebirth.
Yes. In order to become who he needed to be,
Yeah.
he wasn't what he needed to be in order to see this through to the end.
Yeah.
And he
that's
was
right.
he
That's
was
good.
getting more of a premonition of that as you go on. And the Balrog sort of represented the need for him to face that thing that I think he was afraid to face. Not just the
Right.
monster, but the fact that he was going to have to go through a death and rebirth in order to be able to do what he needed to do.
Yeah.
I think he knew it, that's where it needed to go,
Yeah.
but he just didn't want to face it yet.
What I love is that that's less intellectual and that's more like an intuition,
Yes,
right?
for sure.
And what's so good about Gandalf is that he does both. He's so wise, but like with what you mentioned before, follow your nose, right? He uses these lower level, like more basic intuitions to guide himself. And then he talks to Frodo about fate and about luck and about what is meant to be and how the world is. And it's like, you were meant to have the ring and I was meant to be here with you. And then you approach a scene where I think he just felt called. He felt compelled. He felt this intuition of like, you have to finish this out. And then everything will be okay.
Right.
And it's like, and nobody wants to fall into the abyss, right? And then just trust to fate that things are going to work out.
Yeah.
But Gandalf does it on purpose. And it's almost like a way of leading even after things, well, the things don't work out well for him, but they work out even less well for the Balrog. But either way, he kind of is still leading them in showing that this is what needs to be done. You have to fall into the deepest abyss and confront your greatest fear.
That is a great point.
If he ran away from that in that moment and was like, "Hey, I tripped him and he fell down. We're good. Like, let's keep going. We got past him, guys. I tricked him." Like Home Alone style, like The Hobbit 2 style. Freaking no. Anyways, we tricked Smaug. Okay, great. But instead, it was like, no. Here's how I'm going to lead you. I'm going to drop down into the darkness.
How can I expect Frodo to go
confront
into
what
his
lies
abyss
ahead
and his Balrog
exactly
if
in
I'm
Mordor.
not willing to do it?
Right. And so he's like, there we go.
Yeah.
And then they build that up too with Saruman, where he's like, Saruman that line that's not in the books, but of Saruman saying you feared to go into the mines, and then having him be so reluctant to go to Moria in the first place, and which is different from the books, but it works so well in the movie because it was like this is his challenge, and he's gonna meet it like head on, basically. Right? He tried to get away from it. It followed him all the way right up here, just like the freaking Haka in Prince of Persia, because which I think was based on the Balrog at least a little bit.
I think so.
This big shadowy kind of monster.
The game's interpretation of what the Dahaka is in actual mythology or whatever. But,
that's it. So then Gandalf was like, I have to show that this is how things work. This is how the world works. This is how fate works. And he continues to be a leader even beyond the grave, even though it wouldn't feel like that at all. Because it's like, oh, he just died. But there was something like willing about his death. He willingly let go. He gave him a little bit of advice, fly, you fools, which some people think means go get the eagles. But I don't think that's what it means. I've heard that. Have you heard that theory before?
I haven't. That's funny.
Yeah, where it's like, oh, fly, Gandalf, because everyone wonders, why didn't the Eagles just take Frodo to and then be done with it?
There is an explanation for this. We're not getting into it.
Yeah, we don't have to get into it. I've heard the explanation too. It's really good. But some people think Gandalf was saying, you idiots, go take the eagles. Go drive the eagles, right? As if you can even do that.
Yeah, as sort of an archetype, you know, with these types of stories, hero's journey type stories, like what this represents is the fact that it's what you're most afraid of.
Yeah.
That is what's required for you to face in order to really grow as a person, as a character, as your character, right? Your character grows. This is not something I would have picked up on at the time. This was something I was probably learning in like my English classes, probably the following year, you know, where they started actually studying the hero's journey or the monolith or whatever.
The monomyth,
The monomyth, and so, but it's something that I have found to be very true of my own life, though. Yeah, there was a couple of flashpoint moments very recent, well, not very recently, a couple of years ago, I would say now, where there was kind of maybe 2 or 3 things that I was like, I had this sense that I needed to make a change in my life. I knew that like where I was at was not working. It was not right. And I stifled and avoided and procrastinated and said, no, that's stupid. No, I'm comfortable where I'm at. No, that's wrong to do. I went through just months, if not a year or longer, of trying to convince myself that these feelings I was having were not correct or wrong or whatever. And it was because I was really, really afraid to do it. There were risks involved that I was like, well, if that doesn't work out, then like I'm going to be in a way worse situation than I'm in right now. And where I'm at right now is actually pretty good. And like,
so you saw darkness ahead, right?
I did. Yeah. It felt that way. And
it's what Elrond says to Arwen. I looked into your future and I saw only death. Right? Yeah. But then Arwen's like, but there was life also.
Yes. Right. And so eventually a couple of, again, very big flashpoint moments happened that forced me to stop ignoring that and to really take it seriously. And I feel like I have been reborn in a certain sense now from where I was 2 years ago from now. And I feel like that's what these stories are really getting at. That's what they're really trying to say with scenes like this, right? It's not just what you're literally seeing on the screen or reading on the page. The monster represents something. It represents that thing you're afraid to do.
Right.
It represents the fact that you're shrinking away from something risky but important. Because you don't grow unless you come into contact with conflict. Right. Conflict that you feel like might be too much to take on. It really stretches you. You really grow. You develop skills you can't without that kind of pressure and conflict. And so that's what you're supposed to be taking from stories. That's why they started telling stories like these around campfires. To represent the fact that, hey, you're going to face things like this. This is a simile for something that you're going to come across in your life that you're afraid to do. And if you don't do it, you're not going to be who you need to be for the even bigger, scary thing that's going to come up later in your life. So you need to take those opportunities when you're the most scared. That's when you really need to be like, yeah, I need to do that.
Right.
So
you know what's crazy is that whole arc it's in the book. It's still there, but it's less obvious.
yeah,
It's strange to think of Gandalf having his own hero's journey. Something about that just kind of feels strange. It's definitely there. But it's less prominent in the books, at least in part because they don't play up his fears as much in the books. Whereas in the movie, there's a lot more of this, even from the beginning with the ring, and there's a lot more of Gandalf kind of maybe being a little bit avoidant, really not wanting to cause problems, not wanting to go into Moria, not wanting to fight the Balrog, even from early on with Frodo. Like you can see some of like when Gandalf's like, I dare not take the ring, not even keep it safe. You know, if through me it would work a power more terrible than you can imagine. And then that's Gandalf acknowledging that he's got this really dark side to himself that he knows is there. And that he's like, I keep it at bay, but in the right circumstances, it will come out. And I don't know if I can handle it, is what. And so then he meets this shadow, which is like a Balrog being essentially a Maya, which is what Gandalf also is it just kind of makes them twins almost in a sense. Like this is his evil half. This is what he could be, right? Now, really, it would be more like something like Sauron, but that's like an immaterial. The Balrog is more like the physical thing that you can actually see. And to see Gandalf's journey, that Gandalf's taking his own journey here. It's so easy to just follow Aragorn or Frodo or somebody else. But to follow Gandalf's journey is something in and of itself, right?
Yeah. Right.
And that's something that I don't know until you started talking about it.
Yeah.
I hadn't really thought of his journey as much.
Yeah. Because he's the wizened.
He's already had his journey. He's old.
He's the archetype of he's the Ben Kenobi. He's the guy who comes in to help the main character and then has to eventually leave in order for the main character to grow and do what they're supposed to be. But no, he's got his own too. He's got his own story, his own arc, and his own demons to face and whatnot. And all of the characters in this story kind of have their moment like that. Boromir has it at the end of when the Fellowship breaks.
You're right, yeah.
Where he kind of has to face that shadow part of himself and he makes the wrong choice, but he works to redeem it.
You know what's good? With Aragorn, it's the paths of the dead.
Yes.
But what's crazy about that is that Aragorn was kind of reluctant to be king. He wasn't excited about just going and claiming the throne and being, I'm the king. But then he meets with the logical, like the conclusion. I don't want to say logical because they're ghosts, but like the storytelling, the narrative conclusion of somebody who avoids this, and it's the dead spirits, and they're like, they were kings, but they wanted to avoid conflict, they didn't want to fight, they didn't want to stir the pot, they didn't want to do anything, and then they were just kind of cursed to just like do nothing forever. Right? And
damnation
until
right?
they finally get off their butts
of the thing that they're supposed to do, they're afraid to do. Not until you actually do that can you grow.
So it's like Aragorn he was on a path to become like them.
Yes.
But instead, he gets them to get off their butts and actually do something for a change, something positive to help the world. Then he releases them, but it's releasing himself too, because by the time the dead show up in Minas Tirith, Aragorn shows up there too. Yeah. And it's like Aragorn going there and finally doing what he was born to do, what he was always supposed to do, finally stepping in there at 87 years old, being like, I'm your king, right? And when he finally tells the spirits, you can go, right? Your oath is fulfilled. That's his own spirit. That's the weight off his shoulders being lifted as well. Like, I've finally conquered my hesitancy as well.
Right.
And by virtue, you all may go as well. It's really good stuff. I love it.
And then you got, of course, Pippin with the Palantir, and then like becoming a guard
Pippin.
or a soldier of Minas Tirith.
And then Mary going to the Witch King.
Yes.
That's right. And
all
Eowyn,
of the characters
and Arwen
have this.
Arwen has it. Hers is the most interesting.
Yeah.
Because her darkness is becoming mortal, essentially. And what the big death question mark that is mortality, right? And what Tolkien... it didn't quite flesh out what exactly happens to mortals after death. And so it's like, who knows? Yeah. But you're right. That's really good stuff.
Even the characters that aren't necessarily the main character, who is probably Frodo, they all have their own abyss and Balrog moment that they have to face, that they're afraid of the whole time. And it's only through going through that you come out on the other side. And that's the thing about it. There is a real risk there. There's a real risk of failure, a real risk of death, a real risk of like it going very terribly wrong, which what makes it scary.
Right.
But it's only when you actually take the chance to do it that there's any way you're going to come out on the other side this kind of person instead of staying here like the ghosts in the mountain and making no progress and making nothing of your life or yourself.
That's Frodo's line. I know what to do. I'm just afraid to do it.
Yes.
Right. And it's like, well,
yes,
you know,
I have to go to Mordor by myself.
Yeah, by myself.
Well, with Sam, but,
but
not without any of you strong dudes.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. I can't rely on Gandalf and Aragorn anymore.
Yeah.
I have to do it on my own with the support of my friend. But yeah.
Good stuff.
That's pretty much what these stories are really all about. So,
I know. And Tolkien was so good at extracting it in such an interesting way. I love it.
It's great.
One of the lines that Gandalf says when he says there are older and fouler things in the deep places of the world. Yeah, than orcs. And then when he says this later on, of course, this was a line, I think this was foreshadowing, at least in the movie, maybe, or no, it came after. It came after the freaking octopus monster, the lake monster shows up. And it's just like, holy cow, like there's really crazy stuff in this world. You just got to taste, right? Like be on your guard. But also when he says the air doesn't smell so foul, it's almost like when you're in the belly of the beast, which is essentially this part, when you're like in it, right, and you're all the way through, you've got to rely on your wits, right, your extra, senses that aren't just your intellect or whatever, because Gandalf couldn't remember. But also, like foulness is something you either feel or smell or something, and you just go the other way. Now, this, of course, he ends up having to confront the Balrog later on, anyways. But when he's trying to guide them through the place, and he uses a sense of smell, it's like he's trying to go away from the old and foul things, right?
Yeah.
And that's how he knows which way to go, because they aren't there, right? Okay. So
should we do Lothlorien or save it for another time?
We're gonna have to save it for another time.
Yeah.
Because wait, what time is it? Oh shoot. Oh dang. Okay, we don't have too much time. I do want to talk a little bit more about Gandalf's line, right?
Yeah.
Because this part right here, just their talk that they have. Where Frodo sees Gollum and Gandalf and Gandalf and Frodo kind of have this talk, right? This was so interesting because I made an observation that I've never noticed before. Gollum gets out of everything. He just gets out of everything. Whenever he's in trouble, whenever something happens, he finds his own way to get out of it.
Out somehow.
Every time, whether it doesn't matter who it is, every single time. Yeah. And what's so funny is that in the case of Bilbo, it was pity. He was just so freaking pitiful that he just lives because he is the most pitiable creature imaginable, right? Mm-hmm. But then when Gandalf says this line, this was so interesting because Frodo says, that Gollum escaped, something about how Gollum escaped, and Gandalf says, escaped or was set loose, right? And I'm thinking, I never had this thought before, but why was Gollum set loose? Now, there's some reason people say, okay, Gollum was set loose because he can find the ring, and then when he gets it, he'll bring it back or whatever. That was Sauron's like 4D chess move. Right. I think Sauron had pity on Gollum. This is weird. But I think that
like a different type of pity, not a pity that comes from a place of compassion, but one that just comes of disgust almost.
Yes. No, everyone. Here's the wildest thing. This is the craziest thing. Okay, I've got this whole thing.
Like you're not even worth killing. Like get the fetch out of my sight.
Something like that. Yeah. Honestly, it kind of reminds me a little bit of Tactics Ogre with that one scene with that one character. Right. Okay, so but here's the thing. Okay, so the phrase "the pity of Bilbo may rule the fate of many." It's repeated in all 3 volumes, by the way. The Fellowship, The Two Towers, and The Return of the King. It's the only phrase to be repeated in all 3 of them. But Gollum is the object of someone's pity so many times in the story, I didn't even realize. So the Wood Elves, they felt bad keeping him up the tree all the time. They had pity on him. He escapes. Faramir has pity on Gollum. Gollum escapes. Frodo and even Sam has pity on Gollum and doesn't kill him right away. Gollum ends up falling into the pits himself. But this is crazy. I said, I doubt he was pitied by Sauron, but either way, he was set loose and allowed to live. Same thing with Shelob. He goes into Shelob's lair. Shelob is like, kills everything, but is like, you can go. And the idea was Shelob was like, oh, he's too scraggly and bony to be worth much, eating. Right? But there's got to be an aspect of pity there too, because you don't always eat the things that you kill. You can just kill for sport. Yeah. No one wants to kill Gollum. Nobody, even Sauron.
You could probably also say this of what's his actual name? Not Gollum.
Smeagol. Deagol.
Smeagol's grandmother. who
Oh,
was like
yes.
the matriarch of
That's
the
right.
little society. he was
Yeah,
from.
yeah.
I'm sure there were probably others who called for some kind of execution for what he had done.
And he just
she
slips away.
lets him go,
Yeah, yeah.
like banishes him instead of punishing him in some more severe way. I'm sure you could probably say that her pity also probably played a role.
I think so. I think that makes sense because he was banished. He wasn't killed. He was banished, right?
Yeah.
But this is the wildest one. Eru Iluvatar pitied Gollum in the end.
Yes,
because
I think that's
he
true.
is reunited. He is allowed to be reunited with the ring, which is the only thing he
love
wanted in the world.
Yes.
He wanted that ring, and the author of Fate basically is like brought him and the ring back together for just one moment before he died because he had to die.
Yes.
It was not going to work out well.
Yes.
But
well,
Gollum,
there was no. He was too far gone at this point.
He was.
There was no coming
Even Frodo
back.
kind of,
His only release from this cursed life he was living was death.
It was death,
that is basically the mercy of it.
Right,
But
sure.
right before death,
he gets
to have it one more time.
And in the movies, they do such a good job. You see his smile, and he's so happy. And even as he's dying, he's holding it up, trying to save the ring. And you can read that as like God had pity on him in his last moment of life. Everyone, every being, big or small, on this whole earth pitied Gollum. He was the lowest of the low.
Yeah.
Right? The skulkiest stinker, slinker.
Literally nobody could bring themselves to actually do real harm.
But he was so evil. He was so evil.
Yeah.
But nobody could kill him because he was so pitiful.
Yeah.
And people saw themselves in him to some degree. And it was like, even the elves, nobody could bring it. Anyways, I thought that was, I've never really heard it put that way before.
No, I like that
But
a
even
lot.
God himself was like, I have to pity you a little bit.
I feel like that plays into what Gandalf is saying to Frodo about there are other powers, Frodo, other than evil that are at work in this.
Yes, there's a power of good too.
And that's how essentially the ring came to Bilbo and to you. There's another power that and that's an encouraging thought.
Right.
That power is involved in this. And so Sauron's pity was probably also motivated by the fact that, and we talked about this in an earlier episode of this, when he makes the call to the evil creatures of the world, they can't resist the call.
Right.
So Gollum should have and was going to chase after Bilbo to get his ring back.
Right.
And he stopped. And he couldn't stop himself from going to Mordor, even though he had no reason to go there.
Right.
But the call to all the evil creatures to come to Sauron was one he could not resist. So he was called there by Sauron, had no power, no choice in the matter.
Right.
Sauron gets the information he wants from him, sees him as being so insignificant that he's not even worth killing, which is where the pity you're talking about comes from.
Right. Maybe
but
pity.
Also, if I let him go and he goes and finds him again, he can't resist my call to come back. He'll bring it back to me.
Right.
So get out of here and go find it. Sure,
Right.
you're going to think that you're taking it for yourself, but then I just make the call and you come back and give it to me and you can't resist.
And there's nothing you can do about it.
So, but that's also Eru Iluvatar.
Right.
Because only Gollum's going to be the one to actually destroy this thing because he's so happy. And in my mercy of letting him see it more time, he'll just jump in the fetching fire himself.
He'll just do it himself.
Because he knew Frodo wasn't going to be able to do it.
That's right.
Probably nobody else. Even Sam probably wouldn't have been able to actually toss that ring in that fire. Nobody was going to be able to do that.
Yep.
Only Gollum's ecstatic accident of falling in was the only way it was going to happen.
Yeah.
And so Eru Iluvatar set that whole thing up.
The whole thing from beginning to end, and including the evil plans in his plan, basically. I don't know. That's what's so beautiful
part of
about
the whole music being
yes, exactly.
Melkor's attempt to take over or control the music, but that was all actually in Eru Iluvatar's
There was
composition.
Nothing. There was nothing Melkor could do to actually
brings it
subvert.
right back to where it's supposed to be.
And I love that you went there. This is so good because Bilbo was meant to find the ring, in which case you were also meant to have it, and that's an encouraging thought, right? But in the books, Frodo doesn't feel too encouraged by that
he's
line,
like,
right?
no, it doesn't.
He's like, no, thank you. Can this please go somewhere
encouraging
else?
at all.
But I know what Gandalf means. He's saying that everything that has led to this point has not come by will of evil forces alone. Just like Melkor trying to sing dissonant music and destroy the beauty of the Ainur, Iluvatar always caused the music to conclude in an even more beautiful manner than they could have guessed. They had no idea where he was going, and because of that, everything they did led to an even more beautiful ending than even they thought. Because that's Melkor guessing Iluvatar's mind and like, oh, he's doing this, well, I'm going to do this. You didn't realize that he was actually doing something else, and that you just played right into it. Right?
It's like 10D chess.
It's 10D chess, whatever dimensions he is.
Melkor can play 4D chess. He's that advanced, but Iluvatar's on 6 levels above that.
So Gandalf is saying that even when you find yourself wrapped up in the dissonant sounds of Melkor's instruments, when the whole world seems to be in his grasp and manipulated to evil ends, it is not so. In other words, have faith, do what you must with what you have been given, and trust that others will also feel drawn towards the good. Because you're talking about him drawing everyone towards the evil, right? But there's another force that draws everyone to the good. And as long as everyone's playing their part, things are going to work out, right? And trust that, things are going to work out, basically. It's really good. So all will culminate in the silencing of evil and the great eucatastrophe, right? Even the very wise cannot see all ends. So instead of fate being ruled by the ring, which seems to want to dominate all life, it is instead ruled by pity, like in a sense, right? And this was Gandalf's big weakness. He says, I pity the weak too much, right? This is my problem. It'll lead to some tyrannical authoritarian thing where all the weak are uplifted. And it's like, this whole like pity ends up resulting in like this disaster, right, that he can see. And that's something that Iluvatar wants to avoid at all costs. But at the same point, it's like because of pity that certain things do happen, right? And it's I thought that Gandalf's sharp rebuke to Frodo when he's like, pity Bilbo didn't kill him when he had the chance. I feel like that was a bit of like, pity is what you do when you want something to live. Not what you say or do when you want something to die, right? Like use pity to save people and to spare lives. Don't talk about this pity in the sense of something that should be dead that lived, right? That's not your call, right? If you're going to exercise pity, do it to make someone live, not to make someone die. And I feel like that's maybe, what he was getting at.
Yeah, I like that. That's good stuff.
So, yeah, it's good stuff. Gandalf and the Balrog. So there's a video. I'm just going to point everyone to the video. There's a video by Nerd of the Rings that's called "What Did Gandalf's Speech in Moria Mean?" Basically,
I don't think I've seen that one.
It's really good. It's a really good video. I actually learned a thing or two. Which was
there's
really
another
fun.
Lord of the Rings channel I should point you to.
There
by
are
the
several.
way, I think it's Girl Next Gondor.
I've heard. Yes,
she's pretty good.
Girl Next Gondor.
I think you would appreciate her stuff. She's great.
So it talks about the flame imperishable, the secret fire. Iluvatar rules with a secret flame, but evil wields the open fire. Because this is funny, because we've talked about this a little bit. In the book, there's the red flame is what the Balrog serves, but Gandalf serves the white flame, something like that. And
the secret fire.
Yeah, and the secret fire, the flame imperishable, right? And that I've been talking about this Promethean thing kind of in almost every episode about this. And but I've always thought there's like a separation. There's like the good fire and then the bad fire. And here's something that I learned in Nerd of the Rings video. It's the word, I am the wielder of the secret fire, or I'm a servant of the secret fire, wielder of the flame of Arnor.
Arnor, yeah.
Arnor is the word for the sun in Sindarin. It was one of the trees. It was the tree of the sun, but it became the sun. I didn't realize that because the Promethean myth is all about the flame of the sun, right? And basically Gandalf is saying, hey, I've got the real fire. You've got your little counterfeit fire that can only work to corrupt and burn and destroy. I've got the fire that builds and creates life, right? And what's really good about the way that Gandalf ends up dispatching the Balrog, at least from the bridge, right, is that he's giving him this whole speech of like, hey, I serve the highest, you serve the lowest, and you're going to join him down in the bottom, right? And that's what's happening here. There's nothing you can do about it. Because I serve the highest, basically. And the Balrog kind of sneers at him.
And hesitates for a moment.
It does. He does. He hesitates. But then he steps on the road. He steps on the bridge. And I've always thought it's so interesting that Gandalf's magic is less flashy. It's less overt. It's less, and it's more subtle.
That bothered me as a kid, but now I really like it.
I love it now. Because if he got out his wand and was like, I cast a spell on you, that wouldn't be nearly as fun and cool as this. Because this shows kind of that fate aspect into things as well, which is basically Gandalf strikes the bridge at just the right amount to make it crumble, basically. Like there's some maybe physics way you could talk about this, but I actually want to talk about it in the way that Gandalf kind of uses this super, because he's like, I've got power you can't even dream of, Balrog. Don't come here. You can't make it, right? Like I'm at the behest of the highest. Well, when the Balrog shows up, he's basically telling the Balrog that Flame of Udun, you shall not pass, the dark fire will not avail you. Yeah. So what he's saying is that I am standing on a solid foundation and you are standing on a weak foundation. And then the Balrog steps forward and all Gandalf does is reveal to him in physical reality the metaphysical truth, which is you're on shaky ground.
Yes.
The ground upon which you stand cannot hold you, whereas the ground upon which I stand is solid, and you will lose. And that was what happened. Then it just played itself out in the story. The Balrog steps on the shaky ground, and like the man who built his house upon the sand, just totally gets washed away, and he falls because his foundation is shaky. Anyways, there's something really interesting about that, because then Gandalf ends up jumping in. We've already kind of talked about that.
Yeah.
But the way that he does it, the way that he is able to fight this Balrog, at least at this part, I know Peter Jackson in The Two Towers gets Gandalf to bring out his sword and all that stuff. And I don't know how the fight went, how Tolkien thought the fight went when he finally slays the Balrog.
Yeah.
Probably swords were used at some point.
Sure.
But the way that Gandalf uses magic is basically just like the revelation of fate through, like he just reveals the truth, basically.
It's a way
and
cooler
then it plays
concept for magic
way
than
cooler.
Lightning from the end of the staff.
Yeah.
Which is what I wanted to see.
I know, me too, as a kid. As a kid, that's what I wanted. But this is much better. And his whole speech, when he says I'm a servant of the secret fire, he's talking about like life and beauty and goodness and like all that is healthy and wholesome in the world. Like that's what he's talking about.
Yeah.
You know, it's not just like I serve this really strong dude. It's like it's the secret fire is the consciousness, you know, it's the flame imperishable. Yeah. So
it's also worthy of bringing up that he wields the ring, the third ring of the elven rings, right? He got that from Círdan. It's the fire ring.
The fire ring, the red one, right? The red ring. Yeah, that's right.
So he wields the ring of fire too. So.
He's got the ring of fire, and Balrog didn't stand a chance. No. Is what Gandalf says. No. But I almost wonder, and by the same token, if the Balrog was just drawn to conflict with Gandalf as well.
Yeah,
was just like
could be. It's all part of the music. It's all part of the fate.
It's all part of the music. Yeah. I love it.
It's good stuff.
All right. Well, that's what we've got.
That's it for this week. Yeah, we're gonna have to cover Lothlorien next time because there's actually a lot there.
There is so much. A lot of it's in the books, though. I might hold back.
Every time I go through a book, because I read books kind of over and over again. I've read like, for instance, the first Witcher book like many times, and each time I read it, we kind of talked about this in our book club.
Those are good books.
Yeah, a different part becomes my favorite part.
Really?
Than the last time.
Oh, nice.
It's like I'm picking up a new thing that I didn't see last time, which is kind of why I like to read things over and over again.
Yeah, me too.
On this reading of the novel, Lothlorien ended up being my favorite.
Me too.
Part of the book, which it had never been before.
Me neither. It was like a lull. It's almost like Tom Bombadil-ish, where it's just like, hey, you're here until you can leave. I had the exact same experience.
There is so much in this to talk about. I'm really excited to talk about. That stuff that I had never picked up on before, and an insight that really resonated with me this time. So
cool, good.
I'm excited to get into that.
Because within the first half, within book one, it was Rivendell. I really identified with Rivendell. In book two, it was Lothlorien, but I'll bet you it's for different reasons. So I'm excited to hear what stood out to you.
It'll be fun.
The first line that is uttered by Galadriel as she's like telepathically speaking to everybody as they enter the forest is, your coming here is as the footsteps of doom, right? Mm-hmm. And then Frodo's kind of like stopping and everyone's like, you okay? Because he's hearing the voice, but nobody else is. The idea of the coming of Frodo is the footsteps of doom to the elves. They're going to have to go. Everything's going to die. All shall fade, right? Yep. This big deal. Yet they welcome him. Maybe not totally initially.
Not completely.
But as soon as Galadriel, they get word from her, oh, you are all welcome. Everything's good. At least that's how it goes in the books. But the idea that the elves can recognize that this thing that's going to destroy their culture, destroy their world, destroy their trees, destroy everything that they love, but it needs to be done.
Yep.
And even though it seems like a bad thing, right? In the movies, I think in the extended, no, it's Haldir. He says, "You bring great evil here," right? You can go no further. Yet then the recognition that though this will result in destruction, the result will be better, right? And that the elves are uniquely able to see that, whereas the humans are not. And this is always a thing with Aragorn and Boromir. And there's a deleted scene in this section where Boromir's like, "You're always afraid of who you are, of what you are." And Aragorn's like, "I'll not lead the ring within 100 leagues of your city," which he should not have said openly to Boromir's face.
Bad idea.
But the idea is that, yes, there's weakness and frailty amongst men, but there is strength also.
Yeah.
But you don't see it, Aragorn. This is your fault. But the truth is that humans have a hard time seeing the long-term benefits for the short-term costs.
Yeah.
Would much rather have long-term costs and have the short-term benefits, right?
Yeah.
And that's just a human thing.
Yeah, you make some good points there that bring up something that I feel like almost intuitively my whole life has been just something I've latched onto in certain stories as like a thematic principle.
Yeah.
And that is the idea of passing or letting go or acceptance that something's coming to an end.
Yeah.
When this sort of takes center stage as a guiding sort of principle by which the work is sort of examining, I tend to almost just intuitively get really, really interested in that, which is a big reason why The Outer Wilds, which we just recently played, became my favorite game of all time.
Such a great... The more I think about it, the more I'm thinking I'm getting closer to that game being one of my favorites. It's possibly my favorite game too.
It's because it does that so well. And this is at the very heart of almost all of Tolkien's
Numenor
work.
And all of that.
Because, I mean, in all the stories, it's this.
Yeah.
And I think it is largely, and I don't want to attribute certain allegory to him because he's all against that.
It's all good. It's all good. Some of it is clear.
Certainly his life played a role in how he thought about this because he lived in the country as a young boy and became orphaned and had to go into the city where the Industrial Revolution was happening. And he saw the mechanized world versus the
natural world.
Certainly had to come to a certain level of acceptance of this.
But
the sad passing of a world that he loved before. And the fact that this is something everybody has to do. I mean, you're going to lose people. You're going to lose things you love. You're going to lose stuff. And eventually you're going to lose your life. Yeah. And it's really hard for a lot of people to accept and come to terms with that. Very scary. And it's just a big part of what he writes that I feel like he understands and articulates so well. Yeah. Even in just little things like you're saying here. Yeah, yeah. The footsteps of doom. Yep. This
welcome
culture. This culture is totally isolated.
Oh, totally. And everyone's afraid of them.
In an attempt to maintain their culture and lifestyle and to not have it
literally forever.
To not have it be harmed or influenced by anything on the outside. And they've held on for so long. They've resisted the acceptance of what's coming and what's changing. And now they're kind of on this, they're at this point where they have to accept it. And but they're, for as long as they can, they're clinging on to the last second that they can. Yeah. And Galadriel is as a character, you can see why.
It is a good arc.
If you've read Silmarillion or any of the First Age stuff, why she's resisting that. Yeah. And why all of the Noldor did. There's a lot of factors go into that we won't talk about in this movie analysis, but it's I think captured really well in the film.
No, I think so.
For those who know, you know, and you see it, and for those who don't, it's just a cool forest.
Yeah. I think you hit on something with death, though, because death is such a big theme here with Tolkien. And the humans die, but they resent it. They live a short life and they die. They resent the death. The elves don't die. But there's a way that Tolkien he tries to connect this to the real world as much as he can in his mythological sense. But there's a way in which the humans can see readily the benefit of being an elf, right? Of never dying, right? But when the world passes away, when all things come to an end, the elves will come to an end as well. Whereas for the humans, the sense is that Iluvatar has something greater planned for humans after death. And that the elves actually kind of want that too, right? But the humans can't see that. The humans just see, you guys live forever. I want to live forever. This is bull crap. I'm really mad. This is stupid. And like, I want what you have. I want what others have. Whereas the elves are a lot more kind of accepting of letting things pass.
Yes.
And I think Tolkien is really kind of hitting the nail on the head here with the way that he sees humans in general and the way that they tend to act and the way they tend to, because they can't see the good that will come later, they just want everything now.
Yeah. And I think that to a large degree, it takes, in order to have the wisdom to sort of be able to accept, it takes living longer.
It does. That's
So
true. That's true.
the
But the
elves-
Numenorians.
Well, that's my point.
Okay,
is,
good.
Okay, so how do I structure? Because I know exactly like the dissonance in what I just said.
Yeah.
I'm trying to like navigate that and make it make sense. So when the Numenorians get a taste of what the elves had, as they're longer lived, it actually just makes them more and more like
Attached
desperate
to
or
life.
obsessed
Yeah, to the world.
with being attached.
Yeah.
So I would liken that if we're going to apply this to the lifetime of a human being, right? Getting into maybe an adolescent or early young adult sort of age,
Yeah.
and being told that's where your life ends, and being like, but there's so much more
Right.
that I haven't done yet, and being eager for life. Whereas for those who have lived much, much longer, and I think are much more, have experienced more, have had a lot more sorrow in their life, have lost a lot more. And I'm not saying this is universal. I'm trying to speak of generalities with this. Are better at sort of accepting what's going on. It takes a lot of lived experience, I think, to really get to that point where you're ready to do that. And the elves, in their sort of like much longer lived fantasy analogy, or not analogy, allegory of this, which is allegories he doesn't like, but
It's all good.
anyway,
Can't avoid it.
they have the wisdom
Yeah.
to be able to realize the importance of letting go, because they've seen all of the bad things that came from clinging onto it.
Yeah.
They lived through all the wars, and they kept trying to, and it's going to happen. You can't do anything about it. Right. It's inevitable. And so the longer they cling, the more sorrow they have, the sadder they get.
Yeah.
And eventually you've just got to accept that thing.
Yeah.
And I think that's...
And they know.
Yeah.
And going into the West is akin to that ego death kind of. It's akin to just finally letting go. And the elves, I know that if you die in battle, the elves, but there's a reincarnation kind of thing that happens with them in Mandos, right?
Yeah.
But for the most part, it's a voluntarily acceptance. They get on that boat intentionally, and they sail out west.
Yeah.
Except for, I think, Arwen isn't able to do that. Do you want to hear one of my least favorite things? Parts of the Hobbit movies.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
sure.
remember when they're in prison, and who was it? I think it's Thorin, right? That he talks to the king, not Thingol, King Thranduil, right? And he comes back to the other dwarves, and they're like, "What did he say? What did he say? How did it go?" And he goes, "Huh, I told him he could ish kakvin my aidurugnul."
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So the Hobbit movies suck. And that line is enough for me to say, okay, so do you know, because I didn't know this until I watched this recent version of the movie. Ish kakvin aidurugnul, which is what Gimli says to the dwarves. You know what this dwarf has to say to that?
Yeah.
It means, I spit on your grave in Dwarvish. Why Peter Jackson decided to turn that into some stupid innuendo to make like the Hobbit have a cheap laugh is beyond me, because it does not mean anything like that. Like I told him he could spit on my grave. Okay, maybe, but that's not how it came across in the movie.
Yeah.
So, anyways, just so everyone knows, Ishkakvin Aidurugnul means I spit upon your grave.
Gimli says to Haldir.
Haldir, yeah, to Haldir.
In the scene,
because he says, "Enough of this Elvish, speak words we can all understand."
Yeah,
and Haldir's like, "We've not had dealings with the dwarves since the Dark Ages." It was so fun. They skipped the whole blindfolding thing, which I think was probably fine. It was really good in the books, but we got to get to Lothlorien pretty quick. So
don't they do it in the extended edition though? Don't they
there
have them blindfolded in the extended?
I don't recall. I don't think so.
I didn't watch the extended for this. But...
I did, and it wasn't there. There is an extended scene with Haldir and with Frodo, and it's another scene of Boromir.
I might be mixing up
talking with Frodo.
The fact that Frodo and Sam are blindfolded in the second movie or something.
That's right. That's probably it.
Anyway.
So, but Haldir does call Galadriel the Lady of Light. This is very important in Tolkien's work. He refers to Galadriel often throughout the books after we meet her, and always in terms of like the lady, right? And Aragorn will say, "Speak no ill of the lady," right?
Yeah.
That I also noticed this too. Tolkien is very in Tom Bombadil's house. There is the lady of his house, which is Goldberry, and it's just this fantastical house. In Rivendell, you have Arwen. She is the lady of Rivendell, right? And the lady of Lothlorien. Places that have a lady they seem to be better put together. They seem to work well. They seem to be functioning properly. The places that don't have a lady would be like the Mirkwood elves. There's no lady of that kingdom. There is no lady of Gondor. Rohan has a lady, but she's kind of rejecting her role, I guess.
She's a princess too. There's no queen or
there's no
wife
queen, and she's fighting becoming the Lady of Rohan, right? She would rather do something else, right? And so things are different where there is no lady, basically. That is kind of the presence, right, of the presence of the building is like basically summed up in the presence of the lady herself. Yeah. Which I think is true of Rivendell, Lothlorien, and Goldberry, Tom Bombadil's house.
Yeah, sure.
Right, and
it's true.
It's very interesting. Tolkien's and I think probably Virgin Mary is what he's going with there in terms of the church kind of stuff.
Oh, sure.
But that's
if we're talking Jung, we're talking about
the enema.
What's the fourth level?
That is Mary. Isn't Mary the fourth?
No, so you might be right.
Yeah,
no,
I think Mary's the fourth.
No, I think that's third.
Oh, she's
Eve,
third. Mary is the third. So Eve, then Helen of Troy.
Helen is the second. That's
then
right.
Mary, the mother of Jesus. Then Sophia. You're right. So Sophia is the fourth one.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, good stuff. So anyways, this is another thing that I noticed this time too. Lothlorien doesn't have like fire in it. It's the way that they lit it was with Christmas lights, and it has plenty of lights. They look like fairy lights, right? Yeah. They're just like these spots all over the place.
Probably an imitation of the lights from the trees from the first, or before the first age, I guess. But
actually, that's probably true. I didn't even think of that.
The trees kind of glow themselves.
And that's more or less what's happening here. Yeah. There is one fire behind Celeborn as they're talking, and I don't know why it's there. It shouldn't be there for my interpretation to be accurate. But I've been talking a lot about like Mordor's the land of fire, the mountain of fire. The ring was forged in fire, and the fire of the enemy. This is something I don't know that I mentioned earlier, but you know how a secret now only fire can tell? And then Gandalf throws the ring into the fire. Well, fire reveals secrets, right? Yeah. But I don't think I mentioned before how Sauron uses fire on Gollum when he's torturing him.
Yes.
And what that divulges. The secrets of Gollum were revealed by fire. Yeah. But Sauron uses fire in the worst way, right, to reveal secrets and to force things to happen. Whereas in Lothlorien, there is almost, except for one scene, there is almost no actual flames here in this place. There's these lanterns, you can't tell how they're lit, and then there's on set they were Christmas lights. I don't know what the explanation in world is for them, but it's not fire. This is a place that without fire. This is a place where the stars and it's lit almost ethereally in its own natural way, without having this having to use fire that consumes things in order to.
There's also the fact that it's a secret sort of place, right? A place that's hidden, a place that is not revealed to the enemy or whatever. So
exactly, it's almost like a dream world too. Right. It's like, does it even really exist? Is a question. Because when they're there, they don't experience time.
Well, yeah, and they explain that, or he explains that way more in the book. That they thought they were there for weeks, and it was like days.
Yeah.
And they were like, "That's impossible. What day is today?" And it's like, it's like wintertime, January, February, something like that.
Yeah.
And it's just like, no, it's not possible. What? We were there for at least 2 weeks, if not a month or something. They say something along that line. In the book, but
Well, and that's another thing too, is that Galadriel does mention that we are only seeing Lothlorien in the wintertime in the books. And she says, you haven't even,
that you
the spring and summer is where it's really at. Yeah. But unfortunately, then she also mentions, but those will never come again. Yeah. So this is the best it gets, right? And that's wild that she's just kind of accepting about that. But she's been here for like 2,000 years or more. 3,000. How long has she been there for? She's been there for many thousands of years.
3,
right?
Yeah.
And the place is untouched. It's just a tree fortress. It's not like they've built things. It's like, it's just it's just a beautiful natural forest.
Yeah.
And so it hasn't changed much over these past thousands of years, although maybe a different tree is the main tree now because the other one got too old. Although I don't know how long Malern trees live for.
Yeah,
They might live for thousands of years.
I would think that the elves, the power of the elves is in preservation
And that's it.
and things like
Now,
that.
I do have a question, though. Maybe you could enlighten me on this a little bit. Galadriel is saying this forest is ending even if you don't destroy the ring, Sauron's coming, and he's going to level the forest. If you do destroy the ring, the power of the ring...
Because they're their rings.
So her ring was preserving her
elven
forest.
rings are used in preserving Rivendell and Lothlorien, and so their power will be destroyed as well.
Okay,
because
so
they're tied to the ring.
Okay, so then Lothlorien may have looked different previous to those rings showing up.
Yeah, I think that the culture of Lothlorien was probably developed right in that age of the forging of the rings.
Okay,
these elves were sort of building these places because it would have been after the big war where the Valar came over and freaking changed the whole landscape. And
after that point.
So the whole land is different. All those forests, what was the name of the forest that they lived in?
The big forest.
Anyway.
Where Thingol was. I can't remember what it's called.
Yeah, anyway. King Thingol's forest would have been destroyed. That was all way north, past the Shire, even north anyways. And a lot of it's buried, but in the water.
In the water, yeah.
But the point is that...
Doriath?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, that's it. They would have been establishing new places, new cities, new cultures. Rivendell and Lothlorien around after that time. But that's, I don't know how many hundreds of years, but as they're doing that, as they're developing those places,
that's when
Sauron reemerges and begins learning the lore of ring making.
From Celebrimbor, the star of Middle-earth, what was that game called? Shadows of Mordor.
Oh, yeah.
Right, isn't that Celebrimbor? He's not the star, but he shows up, right? His spirit.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
I can't remember the story of the game because I just
I'm pretty sure it's
disregarded it
Celebrimbor.
entirely.
Okay.
But it's not compatible, I feel, with the actual Middle-earth stuff, but it's a fun game.
Okay.
One thing I was going to ask how you felt about this is for the most part, I feel like as we've been going through this and we've noted differences or deviations from the book, for the most part, I feel like we've agreed with the choices for the sake of the film, that it was a better choice for the film.
Most cases.
In most cases, I felt that way. One case in which I really don't is the way they portray the Lady Galadriel in the movie.
Interesting.
They make her like way more creepy.
They do.
Than she is in the book.
You're right that they do. Okay, so let me think about. And first, let me talk about the things they got right in terms of their adaptation. One of them was the voice. That as soon as Galadriel began to speak to them, Frodo said her voice sounded deeper than he expected.
Yes.
Right, and again, what's her name? Girl, lady. Anyways,
you're asking the wrong person. I have a freaking
Kate Blanchett.
There it is.
Okay, so Kate Blanchett has a beautiful voice, but it is lower, and it's authoritative, and it's she's got a very powerful voice, I think, and they did a perfect job of that in the movies. The creepiness, I think, was at least in part because that's how Lothlorien was addressed by Boromir and Gimli. Right? They were like, there's a witch here.
Yes.
This is, be wary, right?
Yeah.
So I think Peter Jackson was just following that up. But you're right that in the books, as soon as they see her, and even Gimli is just like, this is the most beautiful human in the world. I regret saying anything bad about her ever in my life. Like as soon as they saw her, right? And whereas in the movie, they carry that creepiness on, and Frodo's still unsure of her well into like the mirror episode.
It's not until after
the mirror,
and she sort of like shows what she would have become had she taken
the
one
and
ring.
That's certainly creepy.
That's supposed to be, and it was in the book, but it's like the one and only time in which she was.
So Peter Jackson waits to show you that she is truly a good person, a good guy, good person, until after that sequence.
Yes.
Whereas the books don't quite wait that long.
No. And it actually, I was kind of talking about this last time. Every time I reread a book, there's almost always a different thing that becomes, for that reading, my favorite part of the book.
Yeah.
And this is the first time in my, I don't know how many times reading it, where Lothlorien was that.
Yeah.
Like, there was always some other part of the book that was my favorite part. And Lothlorien was kind of like, okay, let's get through this and so we can get
Yeah.
on into the Two Towers.
It's like 3 chapters.
Yeah, and I kind of glazed over a lot of it, I feel like, on previous reads.
Hmm.
This time it was by far my favorite part.
I think me too.
I think that's saying something because I love the book. I loved all the other. It's not saying, oh, this is so much better. It's just for this particular reading, it stuck out so much more to me than anything else. And it's probably because I paid the least attention to it in previous reads. But it's when Gimli is describing what happened when she starts talking to them in their minds, right?
Oh, right.
And she's kind of having a different conversation with everybody
She's like
in their minds.
testing them, yeah.
And the particular wording of what he describes that experience to be was just, I don't know, it just really spoke to me. As far as a lot of things that are on my mind and a lot of things we've been talking about even just in recent weeks.
For it has
on
also
the podcast.
been in my mind.
He
Very
says that I looked into the eyes of an enemy and found compassion.
I remember that. That was
And
a powerful
that
line.
changed his entire attitude from where he was belligerent and like just like dragging his feet and calling the elves names and all of a sudden he loved this place and he loved her more than like anyone he'd ever met in his life.
Yeah. Yep.
And it's because he did kind of what we just talked about in the podcast we just recorded for the public show. He started to understand finally this culture that he had been kind of raised to hate.
He actually met one of them.
Yeah. And saw in the eyes of the enemy compassion.
Yeah.
And that changed everything.
You know what makes that even more powerful? Tolkien fought in World War I, and he wrote that chapter during the very beginning of World War II.
Yeah.
That's a heck of a thing to write. For like think of what he went through. Like Tolkien was at the Battle of Somme, which was possibly the most bloody battle ever in the history of the world.
Yeah.
Right? Just untold death. And that's where he got the idea for the Dead Marshes. Just bodies strewn across a swampy wasteland for miles, you know.
Yeah.
And he saw that. And then he comes back and writes that line. That's powerful. That you'd almost have to say, gosh, he looked into the enemy's eyes many times. And I wonder if he had that same thing where he said, I wish we were not enemies because I feel that I could, be friends with this person.
Yeah. And especially having lost as many friends as he did.
He lost basically all his friends but one. I think
friends.
there was one person who survived with him.
So
wild.
You would assume and even not even, necessarily condemn somebody for coming away from that experience hating the enemy more.
You wouldn't condemn him at all.
For what they took away from you and all this stuff and just the anguish of that. And the harder thing to do, the much harder thing to do, is to look that enemy in the eye and see the common ground and the compassion and what that you're actually more similar than you are different. And that is something that I have felt recently as, things we comment on like public discourse becomes more turbulent and much more divided. And there's a lot more people angry than I remember, at least in my lifetime, that's where I'm sort of being pushed is into, let's try that. Let's try looking into the eyes of our enemies and seeing compassion from them, seeing the good things, finding the common ground. And, that's not to say that I have much hope that I'll convince people on like a larger scale, but I have what I have in terms of the platform and the whatever influence I do have. And to spend my time and my effort in trying to do that. Because how do I articulate this? I think the way that I thought about wars and larger conflicts in the world growing up is sort of the way it's propagandized for us to see, depending on which side we're born into, right?
Yep.
You look at those from your side as the heroes,
right,
and this other side as they were conquerors or they were evil in whatever way, And so this justified us, our defense of ourselves and our values and whatnot. And I think what I feel, at least, that I've come to observe as I have watched the people within my own country starting to kind of divide into these two forces that are ready, it seems, to engage in a conflict of that nature, is that that's just not the case. It's all total misunderstanding on both sides. The inability to look your enemy in the eye and find compassion that is taken advantage of by leaders,
by people who wish to divide,
and who are themselves have lived lives that have pushed them to this extreme fringe edge that makes them feel justified in what they're doing.
Right.
They actually feel they have a righteous cause.
Oh, totally.
I don't think any of these, well, I don't want to say any, probably too far.
There are psychopaths in the world.
I think that a lot of tyrants and dictators probably believe in what they're doing, and that it's a good thing that they're doing. And the reason that they've been able to convince themselves it's good is because they didn't look their enemy in the eye and see compassion, and they got wedged and divided further and further, where they could do more and more justifying, to the point where they're willing to commit genocide or whatever horrific thing they do, and they see that as being a good thing for the world or for their people, and that it's necessary. And I see that happening, and I read that line and I go, that's the cure for our problems, not the war that these people are going to convince themselves is the only way. The problem is, how do we even go about on any sort of large scale convincing people? It seems like there may be a precipice or a line that's crossed where some people just can't be reasoned with anymore. And are we at that point already? It's hard to know.
Because then the question is war ever justified? And it's like, well,
that's kind of the answer.
So, but I don't know.
The answer that I've come to is that ideally, no, I don't think it is. But
there's always specific circumstances.
But it's also unavoidable. Because there are going to be times where no matter the fact that it is true that I think the principle I'm saying that the cure to this is looking your enemy in the eye and seeing compassion or understanding them better or whatever. That's the real answer. That's how conflict should be resolved. Despite the fact that I believe that wholeheartedly, you can't convince everybody that that's the answer. And there are bad actors out there who are going to take advantage of the fact that people are not good at doing that. In fact, the more fearful they are, the easier they are to convince.
Become very manipulable.
That, no, these people need to be destroyed or whatever. And so when that army starts coming onto your doorstep, of course you have to defend yourself.
Of course,
But I don't know, there are other stories. I'm not going to say from where necessarily here, where that, I grew up with, where the people lay down and just let themselves be destroyed. And at a certain point, the invading army goes, what are we doing here? This makes me question everything that I was told by my dictator to hate about these people. They're displaying it in front of me right now that they're not that. So maybe there is, but it requires a sacrifice. I don't know. I'm totally stream of consciousness right now. I don't need to make it sense.
I'll say where I come to on that is that you're right. You're right. I mean, it's in the Bible. It's in the places. It's in the heart. It's in the mind. You can see it amongst friends, and you can tell that it's obvious that what you're saying is true. But at the same time, what if only one side convinces their people to be very compassionate towards the other side? I know. And then what if the other side doesn't play that game and doesn't care?
I know.
And now what? But then, and I don't want to caricaturize, because we're not identifying any one side at the moment.
No.
Anyone can be reasoned with, is my opinion, having met many people in the world. But at the same time, you could just weaken your own families, the people who are at the land you live on. You could just weaken them all by having them be super compassionate, and then you just lose, and now you've got a dictator, right?
And, I don't know. We probably shouldn't continue on this particular stream much longer because we're going to get way derailed.
Okay.
But I that line just really stood out to me, and this whole Lothlorien section did. And I feel like Galadriel was robbed of that moment in the film because she opens her eyes, and I don't see compassion. I see a freaking scary witch.
Okay, so they do this a lot. And we've talked about it to where it's a good thing, and maybe we talked about it to where it's a bad thing. They do it more and more, I notice, towards the end of this film. But at the very beginning, it's like, does the eye see Frodo, or like, what's up with that? Or then when Gandalf's like, or when Saruman is talking to Gandalf, you fear to go into those mines. It's like, are they talking or not? And then Galadriel is like in Frodo's mind, obviously, and he sees her eyes and like, oh, that's creepy. And then at the end, where Legolas and Aragorn are like, oh, there's a shadow and a threat that's been growing in my mind. And then you see the Uruk-hai, and the Uruk-hai, like the captain, looks right at the camera, and Aragorn and Legolas kind of react as though he's looking right at them. Like Peter Jackson does this a lot, where he's using these people who are separated by many, many miles, and that they can't see each other. But he keeps making it seem like they're seeing each other, and it's always done to a creepy effect. Yeah. And in this case, it's done with Galadriel. Frodo sees her as a witch before he really sees her, and that wasn't in the books. In the books, as soon as he sees her, he knows this is a good person.
Right.
Or this is whatever it was. This is a great person, right? This is somebody. All the elves, and Boromir gets upset at Aragorn, saying you were too quick to trust the elves, right?
Yeah.
But they turned out to be fine. That's always how it is. But for Frodo to first see her doing her like one who has seen the eye,
it's like so,
and like opening her eyes with extra eyeshadow
it's
or
like almost
eyeliner.
A jump scare.
Yeah, that's his first sight of her. That
her eyes reveal that in the scene instead of what I felt was the most important part of the whole freaking sequence, which is the beauty and compassion and wisdom and just like intelligence.
You get that by the end of the sequence, but it should have been earlier on. But I can't fault Peter Jackson for doing that, because there's tremendous mystery surrounding Lothlorien, and it is natural to be afraid of things that you don't know anything about.
That's true.
And so they found that, but then by the end of the sequence, they did find a friend. It just wasn't as quick as I think in the book.
Yeah. I don't know. I thought I'd ask you about it.
Good.
I don't know. The movie's great. I'm just like,
it's very good.
I just, one thing about it that I felt was missing that I really liked in the book. But
so the mirror sequence, when we come to that, is wild. Now, when they meet Galadriel, of course, she kind of looks at them and she's testing them. And the way Peter Jackson does that, a lot of her talking is done just in her mind, right? She's just implanting in front of everybody. And nobody could hold her gaze, except I think in the book it said that Aragorn held her gaze like, I think the whole time, either the longest or the whole time.
Yes. Everybody else kind of was like, they turned away.
But not him.
He was able to look her in the eye.
But she's kind of tested them each time. And what she asked them in the books was, she offered them what they truly desired, and she promised them that they could have that if they would leave the quest, basically.
Oh, yeah.
Like, if you leave, you can have what you want.
Yes.
And all of them failed that test.
Yeah.
They all looked down and couldn't hold their gaze because their own eyes betrayed their thoughts, which were, I would do that, and I'm ashamed.
Yeah.
But Aragorn is the only one who was like, this is my quest.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, my second favorite part of the Lothlorien sequence in the novel was the fact that Sam looks into the mirror.
That's right.
And
he doesn't in the movie.
Sam's not there with Frodo at this part.
Yeah,
they just have it with Frodo and Galadriel. In this case, I understand it.
I understand.
You have to keep the scene shorter.
And Frodo ends up in the movie. Frodo sees some of what Sam had seen.
Yeah,
which
exactly.
was the Shire,
the Shire
burning
burning and stuff. But this was the one point I think in the whole trilogy where Sam is not like stout-hearted and just like fully behind supporting Frodo and going through with this. This is his moment of doubt.
Yeah.
And he falls back from that and is like, I have to go home right freaking now. I can't let them dig up these plants.
Yes.
The whole thing
and
was they're gonna burn our tree.
Yes.
Because he's a gardener.
He loves
that's
things that
what's
grow.
important to him.
Yep.
And he for a second, it was more important to protect the greenery and the plants and the wildlife of the Shire than it was to support Frodo in this quest. And there was just something about that moment for me in the novel, in sort of Sam's arc, because I had talked about how, well, I guess I haven't talked about it on this, but I talked about it in the video I did on my own channel, that Sam, I think, resembles Bilbo's spirit a little bit more than even Frodo does.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I think
His
so.
willingness to go out on the journey and that being an important thing as far as your personal growth. And this was the one moment in the story where he is sort of, but he quickly comes around.
He does.
And it just shows the strength of his heart. And I think it's a big reason why I think most fans of these stories like Sam more than Frodo.
Yeah, Sam's
I mean,
awesome.
he feels more like the main character from a certain point of view. There comes a point where Frodo is sort of just lost. The burden is too heavy, and Sam's the real reason.
Yeah.
And I think his resistance to the ring is stronger than Frodo's for this reason, because and why Bilbo's resistance to the ring was as strong as it was is this willingness to go out. That's kind of my personal reading or my personal interpretation of this.
Because Frodo was a lot more reluctant.
Yes, he didn't want to
Bilbo
go.
or Sam.
He did not want to go.
Yeah.
And I think that is why the ring, on top of the fact, of course, he's on the precipice of destroying it. It's working way harder on him.
Yeah.
And it's obviously all that's true, but I feel like his reluctance and Sam's willingness is why he's the more revered and loved character of the two by the end. And I saw like the moment, I guess, right there where he sort of like made the decision that even the worst thing I can imagine happening is not going to stop me from doing this.
Yeah.
And I thought that was really important.
That's probably important that happened to him before he committed to go with Frodo. That he needed to experience that moment of doubt, that moment of weakness, to know that I could be convinced I need to up my game, or I need to be better, right? I need to be better than I already am, because like I can be weak too. And Galadriel showed it to him in a test before he actually had to deal with the real thing, right? Which comes a little bit later on.
Yeah.
But in the mirror, I just want to talk about the mirror a little bit, because in the first episode, I do bring up the mirror, and that basically our whole viewing of this movie is done as though we, the audience, are looking into this mirror.
Oh, that's true.
And seeing the past, seeing things that were, things that are, and some things that may come to pass. Yeah, like the patterns of existence, I guess, that manifest through the past, present, and future. And the way that I have it here, I'm using a little bit of Lacan psychology here, but the Mirror of Galadriel is dreams. It basically symbolizes dreams.
Yes.
And that the elves kind of live in a dreamlike state. It's said that they love the stars more than the sun, because that was what they first saw, I think, when they awoke. They love the stars, and they don't sleep, right? So the elves don't sleep.
I didn't know this.
Is this wrong? Am I wrong about this?
I don't know.
Let me write this down. Okay, so this is written by Tolkien. It says, he, meaning Legolas could sleep if sleep it could be called by men, resting his mind in the strange paths of elvish dreams, even as he walked open-eyed in the light of the world. That's what I'm referring to.
Okay.
I took that to mean, like, they don't really sleep. But basically, he wouldn't call it sleep. Well, they would call it sleep, but men watching him would not say that he was sleeping.
Isn't that kind of how dolphins
sleep? They rest one hemisphere.
Half of the brain, and so they're aware and awake with the other for two purposes. One, they don't drown. But two,
that's right,
so
because
that
they're mammals.
they can keep their eyes open for predators and
because you're never safe in the ocean.
Yeah, and
It'd be such a
I seem to
stressful
remember
existence.
that they'll rest in such a way to where the dolphin on the right side will rest the left, so that he's aware
they'll
with
coordinate
the right,
it.
and they coordinate.
That's genius,
so that they can be watching.
Dude, animals
more.
are so smart.
It's crazy.
That's wild.
It's freaking nuts.
Okay, so elves do sleep, but it doesn't seem like sleep, right?
Yeah.
So their version of sleep is very different from what a human would call sleep. Now, so I will modify what I said before, that they don't sleep. They do, but it's different.
Yeah.
But I would mirror that version of sleep. That I think what Tolkien's doing here, at least symbolically in a way, is that death is equated with sleep, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the elves are immortal. They can die, but they come back basically if they choose to, and they don't die the way that humans die. Also, they don't sleep the way that humans sleep. There's like a 1-to-1 here. There's like a connection here. And then you go to Lothlorien, and the whole city doesn't sleep the way that people, like, time just doesn't exist in that city, right? Or in
that's
in
true
the forest.
of dreams and
Yes,
of sleeping.
dreams, exactly. That's what I'm equating
Time
here.
is sort of, feels different.
Yeah.
You can feel like you've been dreaming a lot longer.
Time keeps on slipping
exactly.
into the future.
Into the future.
But so
future.
if I'm going to say that the mirror symbolizes dreams, it's because the things that you see, they may be true, they may be not, right? But she says something very important here that I want to touch on and see, get your thoughts on this. She says, do not disturb the waters, as he's watching the sequence that's going on. Well, we heard that line before from Aragorn with Merry.
Right.
Merry's throwing rocks in the lake in front of Moria, and Aragorn's like, don't disturb the waters, right? There's this idea about disturbing waters. Now, I have a version of Beowulf that is really cool, but in it says specifically, the storyteller, he kind of adds a little bit of flowery language about it, but the storyteller, trying to mimic how a storyteller would talk 1,000 years ago, he says that he is going to stir up the still waters to bring what was past to the present, right? And then when the Beowulf poem ends, the storyteller then says, now I shall let the waters recede back to their still state, that what is present may pass back into the past where it belongs, right? That what a storyteller does is he stirs the water, he disturbs the past, the waters of the, like in stories, dragons can show up, like all kinds of things that are typically in an asleep state or in a static, not here. I'm bringing these things to life now, right? But don't worry, when I'm done, it's all going to go back. But the analogy used is still waters versus, moving, disturbed waters, basically.
Yeah.
And if you encounter still waters, don't disturb them. Let the past stay in the past, and you don't needlessly bring the troubles of the past to the future. In fact, if you can think about what disturbing water does, water that is still is like a mirror. It's a reflection. That's why it's being referred to here as the Mirror of Galadriel. Right. It's a basin full of water. But when it's still, you see a good reflection, right?
Yeah.
But what happens when you start putting ripples and waves in that? Now look in the reflection. Now it's warped.
Yeah.
You're not seeing the true reflection anymore. You're seeing a warped version of the reflection. And that's like the moon is not giving you sunlight directly. It's reflecting a version of sunlight to you, but it's not like true sunlight. Yeah. So if I can equate anything here with that, I would say that the mirror is essentially dreams. It's something like what you would experience when watching a movie, when your mind goes to something of a dreamlike state to experience the movie. And you're seeing something that you ought not like mess with, basically, right? Specifically with your dreams. If you tamper with the waters in your dreams, you'll end up seeing things that maybe aren't real, that aren't true. So the Frodo or Sam risk turning what is true into falsehood by their own tampering with it, basically. If you disturb the waters, you're tampering with something that is supposed to motivate you or bring you to do something. And you may end up doing the wrong thing because you put your hand into the dream instead of letting the natural state of things kind of reveal itself to you. You tampered with it, right? And now it's going to become like a self-fulfilling prophecy kind of thing because your hand is now in the work here, right? Yeah. So it's very important not to touch the waters. I just love that line was repeated twice.
Yeah.
In the same reason, I think, both times.
I've never caught that before.
Yeah.
And I'm also thinking now, you're talking about dreams in mirrors and all this stuff, and there's sort of an illusory nature to this, right? And that's kind of the life that the elves are living now.
Sure.
This illusory sort of like isolated place that is ignoring the reality of what's happening outside of it.
It's a fantasy.
Clinging on to a fantasy or an illusory world and sort of refusing to accept, like we've been saying. Like the reality. And that is kind of represented in what you're saying too. But
so this was another fun part. Remember when Sam is like, the greatest fireworks ever seen, they burst in colors of blue and green. And he's got that poem that he kind of sings. Oh, that doesn't do justice by a long shot. It was actually Frodo that sings that poem.
Singing laments to Gandalf.
Yes. And he's trying to do his best. Yeah. And
in the book, it was Frodo.
Because you mentioned before that Frodo is quite different in the movies versus the books, right? And this is one example of Frodo. He's too solemn in the movies. He's too just always pensive, and he never does anything like that. The cow jumping over the moon line would never have been Frodo of Peter Jackson's Frodo. Yeah. And then him standing up and singing any song would not fit into Peter Jackson's Frodo, the way that he's painted Frodo out to be. But the way Frodo was is, Frodo wrote that poem. Now, I think Sam did write maybe that part at the end, but Frodo sang like several beautiful paragraphs before he got stuck and was like, I don't know what to write. And then Sam said, well, I have an idea. But then Peter Jackson's like, okay, Sam will be the dumb buffoon who gets up and sings. And Frodo's just like in his own world all the time, right? Yeah. Frodo did not seem very happy in Lothlorien.
No.
And all the while, even when finally Galadriel is like not creepy to him, then it's like to be a ring bearer is to be alone. And now Frodo's just thinking about how he's got to be alone the whole time. And so he can never have peace. But in the books, I think he really did experience a peaceful moment in Lothlorien. And Peter Jackson more or less ignores that. I don't even know if it was a good call or not. I'm just saying that's what happened.
I feel compelled to at least say there's probably something in Galadriel's like speech in place of a Dark Lord, you'd have a queen. Yeah. There's probably something there that we could talk about, but I just don't think I have anything there. But it feels almost incomplete to not do it, but I just to bring it up.
Well, the only thing I can connect that to is when Gandalf says, I dare not take it. Yeah. Right. So we have the two, other than Elrond, I guess, we have the two wisest people in Middle-earth, maybe even including him, but he's called the wise anyways. Two of the three wisest people in Middle-earth are like, don't give me that ring. I would become a tyrant. And it's like, how could she become a tyrant? How could Gandalf become a tyrant? Are you kidding me? And there's a moment at the end of the movies that did not happen in the books, but that Aragorn kind of experiences a little temptation from the ring too. And it's just like, man, the way that things are breaking, when the Fellowship breaks after Boromir tries to take the ring, it really does feel like Frodo can't trust anybody. Like this whole thing is broken. It's falling apart. The enemy's here. And even Aragorn is like thinking about maybe taking the ring. And of course, he passes his own test as well. But the idea is that these people don't seek for power. The only reason they're okay, and this has to do with Aragorn being the king as well. It's not like he chose to be the king, but he's going to accept the role that was bestowed upon him by fate. Yeah. That's the same thing that's happening with Frodo, where it's like nobody should ever seek for power. And Tolkien has his whole thing about that. No one should ever seek for power. But when the mantle falls upon you, you accept it and you rule as best as you can. Yeah. The idea of a reluctant king. This is one unfortunate thing about democracy is that you can never have a reluctant
You'll never have
king,
a reluctant leader in that system.
Because they all have to seek the opportunity every time. That's just, whatever. That's just how the system works. Monarchies have lots of failings, but you do sometimes get reluctant leaders.
I wonder how a government would work, or if it could even be possible.
Where you would force people?
Well, no. If there was like a lottery and like the fetching winner like had to be the
what
president.
What if he didn't want to?
And this like, what the fetch?
But here's the thing. Each time he says, I don't want to, you say, that's why it has to be you. Yeah. And so he can never get out of it. He has to be the leader now. Yeah. And as much as he doesn't want to, each time he protests, it's just, you're just qualifying yourself even more. You can't get out of it.
I do want to say, I love the line, all shall love me in despair.
Yeah. Wasn't that good?
Really good line.
That was good.
Especially, like you said, we've heard Gandalf earlier talking about, I would use this ring from a desire to do good, but through me to do terrible evil.
Through me,
And so like her sort of thing, right, would be like wanting to bring
like love,
prosperity and love to the world. But so I'll do that, but you'll also despair because it's forced upon you. And that's kind of like Sauron's whole thing. And sort of, I guess, just the concept of evil in Tolkien's works.
It's a taking away agency, basically.
Yes.
Right? Yeah.
It's trying to bend wills to yours is like what the source of evil is. Yeah. All the way back to the music with Melkor. Yeah. Trying to take it and take everyone's wills and bend it to your direction. Yeah. And so what she would do is bend people's wills to love her. So they love her and despair.
So you can say like love, or with Gandalf, it was pity. It's like, okay, these things that even Tolkien is like, these are great things. Mm. But once you take away agency, you everything's screwed up. And then the people will, they will love you with one hemisphere of the brain and hate you with the other. However that goes,
That's great.
All right. So I thought it was very interesting too, because this happens in both the book and the movies. Frodo tests Galadriel with the ring. Galadriel's testing everybody, right? Like, okay, Sam, she's gazing everybody. You can't hold my gaze. You can't hold my gaze.
Really good point.
Even with Aragorn, she kind of gives him the jewel at the end, right? She's like, hey, because in the books, it was not Arwen who gave him the jewel. It was Galadriel. It was Arwen's jewel, though. But Galadriel's the one that gives it to Aragorn. I'm pretty sure. I read that, I think, today, actually. But she gives him the jewel. And basically, I don't know, she's just testing everybody all the time, right? Mm-hmm. Are you going to be true? Is this going to work out?
Yeah.
And then Frodo's like, here's the ring.
Yeah.
And she's just like, whoops. I'm supposed to do this to you. And all of a sudden she's like, well, I can't deny my heart has greatly desired this.
And think of this too. Who else in the entire world would even have dared to test the
lady of the forest?
And this kind of works into the whole hobbits being this totally overlooked, unforeseen force that nobody thought could ever play any real role in these matters that are much way above them.
Yeah.
And just sort of overlooking them, undervaluing them. And in the end, I don't think anyone in that culture would have dared test Lady Galadriel. And I don't think Frodo was necessarily purposefully doing it.
No, I don't think so.
But that's the role he ended up serving. Only he is even capable.
Yeah. That's true. That's right. Who has anything that she could want? And it's like, oh, he does. The insignificant person has something that she could want.
Yeah.
Right? And she needs to pass the test. And the way she says, I will diminish and go into the west and remain Galadriel. Yeah. Anyways, I thought that was wonderful too. So the fact that Frodo kind of turns the test back on her, but her passing it means that she has to leave. She has to go away.
Yeah.
Right? Because everything's over. This was her one chance to maybe preserve Lothlorien.
That's
longer.
The real temptation.
Yeah.
It's like the whole temptation of her entire people of clinging to Middle-earth.
One day it would have happened anyways. Yeah. And when you're immortal, it doesn't matter how long you're alive when there's still infinity to go in front of you. And once something happens and you lose it, it's still gone forever. And then you still have forever to live without it. Yeah. So it's like, it almost just doesn't matter. Like even mathematically, it just doesn't line up. Yeah. Right? Like there's no sense in delaying the inevitable, especially for somebody who is immortal like that.
Yeah.
But mortality is a different case, but for her, it's like it doesn't even really make sense. You know you got to go to the west, and you have to say sorry to some people. It has to happen.
You've been avoiding that a long time,
for a very long time. So the task was appointed to Frodo. I love that you would even say that it was appointed to Frodo. Why? Because Gollum freaking lost his ring, and then Bilbo just happened to do his little trick and then drop it in the doorway. And now because Frodo picked it up, it was appointed to him. Mm-hmm. Well, depending on how you're looking at things, right, from the long, high scale point of view, yes. But in the moment, it's like, what are you talking about? I just found this thing. Like my uncle just happened to have it. This wasn't appointed to me by anyone. But fate is a real character in these stories. And I love that Peter Jackson doesn't miss that, right? Yeah. It would be so easy to miss that and to just try to be hyper logical about everything and to try to not really talk about being lucky or not and whether or not that has a huge say in things. Mm-hmm. And specifically to talk about fate as though it has some kind of agency. But Peter Jackson allows that into these modern movies, which is so good.
Yeah.
So this is where she says even the smallest person can change the course of the future. And from this point on, I only have a couple of notes before the end of the whole movie.
I feel kind of the same way because it's mostly just a lot of action.
The end is just a big battle. It's just a lot of fighting. And it's cool. It's cool fighting.
Yeah. And I mean, you got Boromir's redemption, but we've already covered that.
We already talked about Boromir and Frodo pretty good. We already talked about his redemption. We've already talked about Aragorn and the test. We've already talked about basically everything here. So I just have a few things. Mordor is the land of fire, and then Boromir dies. That's all. That's holy cow, we're at the end of the movie here.
I'm actually surprised that you didn't pull something from the statues.
The Argonath?
As far as symbolism goes.
I did find it very interesting that they were saying stop. Because the first thing that went to my mind was these people are saying don't come here. Mm. And then right behind them is a waterfall. So is this really a very logical place to put the intro?
For somebody.
Because it's no, they're basically saying, hey, look out, there's a huge waterfall behind me. Be careful. Stop, slow down. That's actually what I took from this viewing.
That's actually really funny.
It is pretty funny.
I'm trying to remember. I don't remember the lore behind when they were built.
At the height of the kingdom. They resembled the height of the kingdom.
So this would have been when the North and the South Kingdom were still...
That's a good question.
United, and because isn't that Isildur and or is it a different
Elendil?
Is that Elendil or not?
I actually don't remember. I don't remember who they are.
I'm not remembering the lore behind when this was built.
Yeah,
but as far as where things are now, the east and west of that river are kind of like the dividing points between the dark forces and what's remaining of sort of those that resisted.
I will say it is very interesting that the statue is still there.
Yeah.
Right? It hasn't crumbled. It isn't completely gone. It's still there. So like the old kingdom has been preserved at least this much.
Yeah.
Right? Yet the kingdom's borders have receded greatly since then because they crossed there and they're still nowhere near Minas Tirith. Minas Tirith is basically just the city, and then there's the realm of Gondor. But like their influence does not extend up to there anymore, right? You can imagine like if China built the Great Wall of China and then the Great Wall of China 1,000 years later ended up in like Russia or Mongolia, because just how things work out, where it's like, well, they couldn't keep that land,
Right.
They once claimed it and they couldn't now. And that's sort of what I get a little bit here. But the fact that they were saying halt, I did think of that a little bit because they're holding up their hands, right? It could be they're holding back the flow of the river. It could be that they're telling people not to enter, or it could just be a massive display of power, which is more likely the case.
The defenders, the sentinels.
But they're just crossing through, basically. And it's almost a warning, right? You could almost guess somebody's going to die if we don't heed this warning here, which is exactly what happens.
I do think it's emblematic, at least, of the sort of cultural attitude of what you call them, Gondorians, right?
Yeah,
they are the defenders of like the entire freaking Middle Earth, basically.
And so
they are the ones who stop the enemy from progressing. And of course, like they're not the only ones, and that's what's kind of called out to Boromir. But that's their attitude about it.
Yeah.
If it's by the blood of our people that your lands are kept safe.
Yeah.
That's probably a symbol that sort of represents that spirit of,
I think so,
how they see themselves.
And this would be the kind of statue where were the enemy to take over it, just like what they did with another statue in Return of the King, they would behead those things quickly.
Yeah.
So it's like the enemy's reach has not yet come here. Gondor's property is no longer at that point, but the enemy has not yet destroyed these things. So there's still, the preservation is still, there's still hope. Yeah. Something like that.
I love how they sell the scale of these things in the movie. Because it can be really difficult, particularly with like CGI shots sometimes, to like really get across the sense in the viewer how big something is.
Once you see that shot of them sailing past the foot of one of them, it was like, whoa.
And then especially up in the air when the bird flies out, how small it is. Yeah. Like it has a nest like in the eye or in the ear or something of the statue. They did a really, really good job of selling that massive sense of scale. It's so really majestic, and the music is really perfect.
Yep.
For just, again, kind of showing you the majesty of these cultures as they once were that are passing or being lost now.
Yep.
That you really get that sense from the whole scene. Like, wow, like what we came from, those dudes were like way cooler than us. And we're never going back to that. Yeah. And it's about sort of accepting and letting go of that,
right,
and issuing in a new age. But
another thing that really hit me in this final viewing here was the fact that Frodo has to go alone, but Sam comes with him. Right, there's something just beautiful about that line. Because Gandalf knew he has to do this alone. Aragorn, in the end, is like, I would have gone with you to the end, but I understand you. And he's like, look after Sam for me. Like they have an understanding. You're leaving and I'm letting you leave because I recognize you have to leave. Yeah. Galadriel, to be a ring bearer is to be alone. That is the point. You have to be alone. All these wise characters throughout, even Frodo himself being like, yes, this is it. Yeah. I have to be alone. Yet somehow the fates have delivered him a trusting companion to be with him on his journey, right? That as they drill it into you, through several characters, he has to do this alone. Yeah. And then Sam comes with him. It's so beautiful. I love it.
I feel like it was a lot clearer in the novel that he was wrestling with this almost the whole river ride, basically, based on what she told him.
Yeah.
she basically planted that in his mind. Like, you're going to have to do this by yourself.
Yep.
And he's like wrestling with that the whole way. And they all notice something's not right with him.
Right.
But, and he just like, because they're all debating, okay, what are we going to do next? Are we going to go to
Minas Tirith
or this way? And
Gorgoroth,
we're going to leave it on the ring bearer to decide.
Yeah.
And he like keeps like delaying answering that.
Yep.
Because he knows the answer is you guys have to go there and I have to go
Somewhere
that way.
else.
But he doesn't want to do that. He's terrified to do that.
Yeah.
And at the point where he kind of gets separated in the woods, it's at the point where they're basically making him choose. Okay, we can't go any longer or delay this anymore. You have to choose. Are we going to Gondor or are we going to the Mountain of Fire? And he's like, well, let me be alone and think about this for a little bit. Yeah. And he goes out in the forest by himself.
He's gone for a while.
And what he's wrestling with is that. In the movie, it makes it feel like he's just afraid to go to Mordor
at all. That's true. Yes, I think of that.
Like, even with companions.
But I didn't think that this viewing.
Yeah.
This viewing, I actually felt a lot more for him that he has, as a small person, this such a difficult choice to make, and especially as everyone starts trying to take the ring from him.
Yeah.
And things start falling apart. I actually started to feel like Frodo is a better character in the movies than I had judged him to up to that point.
Yeah.
Which is like, he is dealing with this quite well, actually. Everyone around, especially when Aragorn's like, where is the ring? And he's like, stay away. And he like runs away. And it's like, I almost like see one of my kids like being afraid of me the way in a moment or something like that, where it's just like, I don't know. I have this weird, like, kind of, I see something there that I actually start to think like, wow, Frodo, I see the weight of this decision on him and how difficult it is and how he's like a kid in this world of adults and the adults are turning on him and he doesn't know what to, well, he knows exactly what to do, but he's so afraid to do it. And I feel for him more this watch through than I did the previous ones.
Well, and then another thing that I noticed in reading the novel alongside it this time is that what he's afraid of as well, he's afraid to go alone, but what pushes him over the edge in deciding to do it is the fact that his friend was corrupted by the ring. That ultimately is what gets him over his fear.
That's right.
Is he's like, if I take them with me, they're all going to get corrupted.
Yep.
That's what he's even more afraid of than going by himself.
That makes sense.
And that's what pushes him finally to make that
That's
choice.
kind of what I got this time.
And I thought that was... Well, of course, it's easier to like get those types of internal thoughts across in a novel when
like
you have an omniscient voice than in the movie. Yeah. And so I just remember being like, oh, that's what's going on in his mind at that point in the film. And, you know, I kind of looked at his encounter with Boromir, because Boromir is kind of built up all through the film to be someone we should be suspicious of.
In the movies,
And in the books, he wasn't. Right. And so this was like a really, really tragic thing. Not just, oh, he attacked me.
Yeah.
But no, not you.
Yeah.
You got, no, I can't let this happen to you guys. Yep. I'm going to go alone now.
Whereas in the movies, I think Galadriel tells him specifically, he will try to take the ring. You know of whom I speak.
Yes, that's right. I don't think that's in. I don't think that's in the novel at all.
I don't remember, but I don't think so.
I don't think it is.
And then Gandalf before Moria saying, "I fear from within" as well. And Boromir walks past.
Yeah.
Like they had been planting this the whole time.
Yeah.
Someone, and you know who, is going to try to take the ring from Frodo. And I don't think the movies or the books did that as much.
No,
or at all.
Because Boromir was legitimately like this super honorable, good guy.
Yeah.
Who was just desperate.
Yes.
And his desperation and fear is what allowed him to be corrupted. Mm-hmm. And this is something that we'll probably talk about eventually when we get to Two Towers, the way they changed Faramir's character in that to be someone who's a little bit more taken, and it doesn't... Because in the book he says something like, if I came across this thing on the roadside,
on the highway,
I would not even think twice. He's not tempted at all.
Right.
Because he's not afraid.
Yeah.
In the way that Boromir's afraid of what they're losing.
That's right.
He's more accepting of the situation. Yeah. What he's afraid of is not having his father's love.
The love of his father.
But anyway, that's why I'm not necessarily on board, though I do understand some of the choices they made from the movie. Like the reason they made that change, they state they made that change, for Faramir's because, well, we've built up this ring to be this like really, really powerful thing that nobody can resist.
Yeah.
But it's like Aragorn resists it. Galadriel resists it.
Tom
Gandalf
Bombadil.
resists it. Like there's so many characters that do, but that's the common thread in why they are not able, or why they are able to resist. And Faramir is just as beastly as Aragorn is the point. And that's why Eowyn turns to him.
Yeah.
And he's exactly the same kind of dude.
Right.
Anyway, but yeah, I don't know what we were talking about.
Well, just the movie's over now. That's basically the end of my notes. So my next notes are about actually the credits.
Well, I love the way he uses the Hobbit Shire theme.
Oh yes.
When he pulls him into the boat and he's like,
oh my gosh,
drowning.
Yes, and I'm coming with you. Yeah,
musically my favorite part.
No, it's beautiful.
I love that theme, and it's so well placed here, in this like perfect moment where Frodo, as we just said, doing the one thing he was most terrified to do is go alone, and he realizing he doesn't have to, and the way that bonds those characters even more, like totally,
because he accepted it. I am alone, and he had finally come to terms with it. Yeah. And then the surprise is, but you don't have to be. And here you go.
And
that's
thing,
such a it's just beautiful.
You don't get this either because this is in the novel version, not the film version. But Sam was running with Aragorn. They were all searching for Frodo. They're like,
that's right, but he couldn't keep up.
Yeah, he couldn't keep up, and he's like, well, think for a second. Yeah. He's like, because he wasn't able to, and he had to turn around and like use his brain for a second. Mm-hmm. I know what he's actually doing. He's trying to go alone.
Right.
And then because he knows Frodo
so
well.
It's not because he's super smart. Tolkien never hints that Sam is an incredibly smart person, or particularly smart person.
Yeah.
But he does hint that Sam cares a lot about Frodo, and Sam gets pretty good at reading Frodo's mannerisms and what Frodo needs.
And he's like the perfect support.
Yeah.
Because of that. He knows Frodo better than anyone, and he's the perfect person to keep him from falling, which is what would have happened without him there. He would have fallen into, the ring would have overtaken him. Well, probably long before he even got to the mountain.
Yeah, Shelob's Lair. Yeah, probably. Well, probably Gollum would have taken it, and that would have been.
So
would have been that.
The way he uses the musical theme there to like bond those characters, I think is just really, really well done. Really beautiful moment.
Yeah, that's nice.
And Sam is just such an endearing character.
Yeah.
Like the response, I'm going alone.
Of course you are.
And I'm coming with you.
That exemplifies one, he's not super smart. Like that's not an appropriate response. But then number two, he's got such a good heart.
Yeah.
It's so good.
I love it. And he basically, I'll drown myself before I let you go alone.
Sam, you can't swim. And he's so single-mindedly focused on helping Frodo.
Yeah.
And that he's just acting a fool, basically. But he's doing it for the right reasons.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just beautiful. I love it.
Anyway.
So then we've got May It Be from Enya.
Good song.
I only want to.
I think it's my favorite of the credits.
It's so good. Nothing will ever beat Into the West, in my opinion.
Oh, you
nothing
like Into
ever.
the West?
Into the West is something else. But May It Be is so good. My daughter loves it. I show my kids the music from Lord of the Rings a lot now, and I've noticed some pretty big things about the music in particular. Howard Shore did such a good job, but Enya wrote this song herself. Well, I think she wrote it with one other person, but not Howard Shore. And it was obviously probably was presented and worked, the music and everything was worked through. But this was seen as, hey, this is good. And she wrote the song herself. At least that's how it's credited. So she has actually talked about this. People ask her, what's this song about? And there's some Elvish in it that's beautiful, but it's about the coming darkness, but then the light. And she says it's a blessing and a prayer. Mm-hmm. And when you hear the song, there's like May It Be, an evening star shines upon you, Mm-hmm. And what exactly that means is it's really profound. It's really beautiful. It's really cool. But I've become haunted by the Lord of the Rings music. Uh-huh. And at least in part because it isn't until I'm an adult that I even understand what it's saying, right? Oh man, because this chokes me up a little bit because I have kids now. So the music is about death. It's about dying, and specifically the song Into the West. That song is about lay down your weary head, like your journey's over.
But
it's not just about death. I've gone my whole, so I loved that song when I was 18 or 17, right? When it first came out, and I was listening to it all the time. And for me to, I'm 37. How old am I?
Yeah.
For me to now discover, whoa,
what it's
I didn't even know what the song was about.
Yeah.
And it's not just about death, because here's the other thing. There's the other song that plays after May It Be, which is just beautiful in itself, because Enya has just an incredible voice.
Yeah.
But the song that plays after hers is, what's it called? I wrote down the name of it. It's called The Road Goes Ever On, Part 2, and it's In Dreams, right? And do you remember there's that boys choir that sings it, right?
Yeah.
And they do the Shire theme, and it's When the Cold of Winter Comes.
Right.
Beautiful song. But there's a line, like, I am so haunted by this music now. I almost can't even listen to it. I show it to my kids because I'm like, they need to be exposed to this stuff.
Yeah.
But the beauty of these words, and a lot of these words come straight from Tolkien, is... like, here's the line that haunts me is, we will meet again. Just that line, just that one line right there. But in dreams, we will meet again. And I'm just like, golly, man, what is that even saying? And I have kids now. And so when I hear these songs, and especially Annie Lennox, Into the West, I have characterized that song. I told this to my wife a little while ago. I was like, I finally figured out what it's about. And now I can't listen to it because I just can't do it. But that song is, it is a mother singing a lullaby to her dying child. And now read the lyrics to Into the West and tell me if you can bear to listen to that song anymore.
As a parent.
I know, it's ridiculous. And I'm just here, I am with my kids, and I'm like, I'm going to show you the sick song. This song's so good. And I've always known it was a beautiful song. But I even want to take it one step further. It's not just a mother and, oh gosh, like just even to like, just the words, like, you're only sleeping. That is haunting. It is so haunting to me. But it's beautiful, right? It's haunting in a beautiful way. But it's not just, because the way that I can maybe make the song a little bit more archetypal, it's not just a mother to a child. It's like the eternal mother singing a lullaby to the dying child, which can be of any age. It could be a 100-year-old person. It could be Bilbo, how old is he when he finally goes into the West? He's 130
to
something.
The race of men in general as they're mortals, or to this illusory life of the elves that's coming to an end. I mean, it relates, again, this whole theme relates to every part of these stories. Is this dying and passing and letting go and accepting.
And just... it's going to be okay, right? Like, yes, humans die. And all throughout this, and Tolkien served in World War I. He was at the Battle of Somme, like all this stuff. Like, he is well acquainted with death of like his most beloved people, you know? And he comes up with these beautiful, because a lot of these songs, like Into the West, a lot of that, even Goldberry sings some of it, like a lot of the song is just taken from the books themselves, you know? And then is just kind of represented in this beautiful way. But Tolkien is wrestling with mortality and death as a society, as an individual, at all levels, right? He's like, humans die. Where's the beauty to be found in this? And to somebody who was in World War I and just witnessed all of his comrades die, his whole battalion was wiped out. He ended up going home with trench foot after the Battle of Somme. He was sick and he couldn't continue fighting. And then his whole battalion got wiped out after he had left. It would have been him, you know. And it's just like, holy cow, everyone he knew there and the war was just dead now. And not only that, he was a leader. He was an officer in the military. So he was the one telling these young kids to go and die. Like, for someone like that to write these poems and to write this book that deals with mortality and death in the most beautiful way. And that's why it's so haunting. That's why Into the West and all of these songs that show up are so haunting to me, because what's the beauty in death? Yet Tolkien's books are all about that. I think they really are at their core. That's what they're about.
I agree.
And as you bring up, what was that game?
Outer Wilds.
Outer Wilds.
Yeah.
And because you had that observation about the potential beauty of death.
Yes.
And it sounds crazy. It really does. But there's something there.
It's counterintuitive to our instincts.
Yeah.
But,
and why is it so beautiful? And that's what I can't get out of my mind. I even read that poem at the end of The Hobbit. The roads go ever on and on. over rock and under tree, and that whole beautiful poem. But then there's that line that's towards the end of it, and it's just like crazy. He says, what does he say? I can't remember the exact song. It's eyes that fire have seen and horrors in the halls of stone. One of these days, I probably won't be able to say it all. I'll edit it. Look at last on meadows green and fields that they long have known, basically. And like, man, like there is, like Tolkien would probably even tell you this, that he died in World War I and that he came back after death, basically, and says, there is life after death. There is beauty. He came home to a wife, and the countryside was all screwed up. He didn't love what had happened to the countryside during World War I, but he basically died and then came back to a loving life afterwards.
Yeah.
Right. And that's almost a metaphor for all of the Lord of the Rings and everything that he's doing. And Peter Jackson allows this stuff into the movies. And I haven't seen any of the other stuff. I don't think it's there as much in The Hobbit. This new Amazon series probably isn't really talking about this very much. I don't know if it will later with the Numenorians. But Peter Jackson in particular, he allows like maybe a lot of these deeper instincts of humans to really show like things like prayer and things like fate and things like the beauty of death, right? It's not so overt, but it's there. And Peter Jackson seemed to know this. He seemed to know this. And that's one of the things that I love the most about these movies. It's that theme and the most important stuff that Tolkien was working and dealing with. Peter Jackson does not shy away from them in his treatments of the movie, especially as Gandalf is telling Pippin what it's like to die and stuff. That's almost Tolkien's life's work, is like working that through. Yeah. How could in his world, he's Catholic, how could a loving God have this world of death that I have personally acquainted with? And then he comes and he does it. Like he extracts the beauty of or the beauty behind death, or the potential beauty that can come after suffering. Yeah. And that's what these movies and books, and that's what this is all about. That's what Tolkien's work was all about. And he did it. He figured it out. And that's why these works resonate even to this day. Like he did it. He was able to do it. But I don't think a lot of people see it or know it. Yeah. I didn't, literally in the past year or so, have I been like, wow, that song I love, I know what it's about now. Yeah. Like, what? Why did I love it the whole time? Well, that was always present. I just didn't know it until later. Yeah. But these deeper themes, I feel like we can intuit that stuff, even though we don't overtly understand it necessarily.
Unconsciously.
Yeah.
And this is kind of where I think the source of a lot of my feelings about death and immortality that we've talked a lot about in various episodes across our podcast and have sort of debated people on. I feel like a lot of my feelings on this sort of began or receded with this story. Yeah. Even though I didn't really know that or recognize it consciously. I think that was the part of it that felt so profound and why I was so drawn to it and loved it as much as I did. And again, I think there's an instinct almost, something that is communicated that you don't. We kind of talked about this in our Jurassic Park analysis, where even if you're not understanding the words they're saying, the message is still being communicated on this unconscious level. Exactly. I feel like this is that kind of thing. Yeah. Where I didn't recognize this is why I loved this movie, but it was. Mm-hmm. And so it's only been in recent years, as I've thought a lot more about death, have had some experience with it, that I've sort of tied those things together and, I don't know, have this real sense of genuine peace and acceptance with my own mortality that has been very freeing to me. And I think, I don't know, I see people who, and I don't want to put this in a way where it feels like I'm talking down to anybody, because I'm not, and I really do feel like there probably is some good that can come in, extending the lives of human beings, and I'm not against that, and I think some people have maybe taken from what I've said that I would oppose that if that were to become a reality or something for other people. And that's not the case at all. I would not personally do it.
I don't think so.
But
either.
I wouldn't oppose it for others. I'd let everyone make their own choice, of course. But there's, I guess my feeling, and it could be totally wrong. It's just my feeling, but is that those people who are sort of clinging to this life are really missing something.
I think so.
And again, it's instinctual. We're all sort of like our primal brains, like drive us to survive and stay alive, and that's all natural, and there's nothing wrong with it. But there is a certain peace and a freedom that comes in the acceptance of this that I can't explain. It's like language is not sufficient to explain it, but it really does totally change how you experience your life. Your life is that much richer because of it.
I think so.
You appreciate it more.
Yeah.
You don't take it for granted. It means more to you. And it's like a new color spectrum of life opens up to you that you didn't have before when you were clinging to life and fearing death and all of this.
It's like the difference between being grateful for what you have and fearing losing what you will have.
Yes.
And like living your life based on one of those two things.
Yes.
And the fear of loss will not give you the same results as the gratitude for having what you have at all.
100%.
Yeah.
And it feels counterintuitive. And I think that's why we've gotten a lot of resistance from people when we've talked about this before. But the more I think about it, the more I read other people's thoughts on it, in good faith and with an open mind, and with the recent experiences I've had, I just cannot make it any more clear that, to me, almost like the one thing that should be the aim of your life is to come to terms with your mortality and accept that and be at peace with it.
Yeah.
And your life will be better when you do it. At least that has been my experience.
So. I think it will. I can't imagine how it wouldn't, but I'm sure, maybe somebody's got some counterpoint there.
Yeah, I'm sure that this conversation will continue for years to come on this podcast.
Yes. And it's very relevant too.
But this is why The Outer Wilds, Lord of the Rings, and stories of this nature, Jacob's Ladder, have in recent times all just been catapulted to the top of my favorite things.
They're the best things ever because they deal with the most fundamental, important things that exist. Yeah, which is just like life and death. Mm-hmm. And you would think that,
and Final Fantasy VII, I think that's another game. Yeah. Because we just talked about spirits within, these aspects about what's going on there with Gaia hypothesis, death and life and stuff like that. I think that's another reason why that story struck me as much as it did, even though I didn't really understand why until later. There's just they all have this common sort of piece at the center, which I think is fundamental to life. To your maximum sort of like fulfillment in life is to wrestle with and eventually accept this aspect of it.
And you don't get the acceptance without the wrestling. No. And there are legitimate questions. Yeah. But ultimately, with you, me, and Tolkien, it's like acceptance is the only way to go. And only once you've passed that can you then look back and see the beauty. Yeah. Which is paradoxical. It doesn't even make sense. It's hard to explain to anybody.
I know, which is why in these debates, it's like
lose.
I feel like I can't articulate.
It's difficult.
There's a great video on Sam Harris's YouTube channel where he talks about his mushroom trip experience, where he essentially says that he's something similar to what I just said, where the language is absolutely not sufficient.
Insufficient. I've seen that one.
But if anybody has the closest thing to it, to the perfect words to describe that experience, it's that video. Yeah. And even that, he likens it to an ocean with a thimble in terms of what you can actually take away from the knowledge and the experience that is.
One could say his cup runneth over.
Yeah. And I feel like this is a similar principle I'm trying to get at. Language only gives me a thimble in an ocean of the ability to describe to you my experience with acceptance of my mortality. And if you haven't had that yet, I can't explain it to you. But I feel like it's fundamental to getting the most you can out of life. And the longer you delay that, I think you're doing yourself a disservice.
Yep. I would agree with that. And I think that's a good place to end this off on.
I think so too. I was not expecting you to go here.
No, me neither. That was this most recent reading of the books and viewing of the films and listening of the music has really been beneficial to me and has really opened my eyes to all kinds of things.
Yeah.
And to, to the richness of life. When Tolkien's describing beauty, what he's describing is like rocks and trees, like stuff that's just right there in your backyard.
Yeah.
And all of his poems, like they're so good about just being so down to earth and so specific to the beauty that it's a fantasy book, but he's describing the beauty that exists in the real world. Yeah. And that's what I love so much.
Everything you see is not going to be there forever. The impermanence of it is what makes it so beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah. That's right. That's right.
It's
yeah.
I don't know how else to say it other than that. Again, thimble in the ocean. That's like the closest I can come. It's because of its impermanence.
Yeah.
That it is so sacred and special and beautiful. And
it's like a sunset or something. Yeah. It's like 2 minutes a day that you see the optimal like sunset.
Yeah.
And you have to be there for that time to see it. Yeah, pictures never do sunsets justice.
Oh, it's not. I'm not
never. I've stopped taking pictures of sunsets because I'm like, it will look like garbage.
Who has been using a camera for, I don't know, the better part of my life now to try to capture the world as I see it.
Yeah.
Literally not once ever in like a beautiful landscape or as we climbed mountains for certain shots does the image we take do justice to what I'm actually seeing.
Once again, it's a thimble in an ocean. Yeah.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
All right.
Oh, and I want to bring one more thing. I'm reading Lord of the Rings in Swedish right now.
Oh, nice.
And the last name Baggins, it was Bagger for the longest time. They translated it as Bagger because it sounds close. But the word they actually go with now is Säcker, right? So it's Bilbo Säcker, Bilbo Baggins, because Säcker meaning sack, right? And then I realized the Sackville Baggins is. I never made the connection.
So
Bilbo's the bag, and then the Sackville is like a cheap bag, is like a sack. Isn't that brilliant?
That is really funny.
So you got bag end and then Sackville, and they're like at odds with each other. It's beautiful. I love Tolkien so much.
I just got to say, this is not related. You've been, I think, like for a while, singing the praises or preaching the benefits of learning languages.
Everyone should do it.
And I didn't actually start for real until just a couple of years ago. But it's amazing the insights like that you'll see when you do it. So I'm playing
all over the place.
I'm playing Planescape Torment. And there's a character there called he's an advocate. That's like his station. Yeah. And it's basically a lawyer.
Yeah.
And I go, advogado. That's the word for lawyer in Portuguese.
It's like an advocate. Oh, cool.
Like
that's fun.
A lawyer is meant to be your advocate. Yeah. That's where the root of that word
the Latin
comes from.
root, yeah.
The law part of it makes you think of them as someone who studies law, but that's not what their actual job is.
Right.
Their job is to be defense lawyers, to be an advocate for somebody. And I like that way better than thinking of them as law dudes.
Than like law people, like go to law school and become a lawyer.
Yeah.
That's fun, man. That's fun. Dude, I love this. I'm glad that you're experiencing the benefits of
I see it all the time.
Multilinguality.
Well, particularly because my mother language is rooted in Latin, so I'm seeing all these ways in which the Latin influenced it and then
the German, the Germanic.
It's like, I actually like the Latin root better for that. Well, I'm sure if I learned German, I would start appreciating those.
Well, that's learning Swedish is because I learned Spanish and I had the same experiences with you. Like, wow, dude, the Latin roots are so cool. Now I'm learning the Germanic roots and they're just as cool. Turns out Germanic English is really cool.
There really is a truth to, and this ties into Tolkien's love of language as well, and how he developed his cultures. But the culture is like embedded in language. And we were just talking about this in the other podcast we just recorded about read more.
Yes, read more.
And especially old stuff, because you'll be connected to your culture when you understand their language better.
Yeah.
So the fact that the Japanese can't understand samurai Japanese is a tragedy because you've lost
a huge
touch
part of their culture.
to your culture, and you can't understand it anymore. And that's why I love biblical language.
Yeah. It's so cool.
It's great. Anyway.
All right,
That's the end
everybody.
of this one. Thanks
Hope
for
you
watching.
loved this.
We will see you again next month. Peace out.